Songs of Silence is a turn-based strategy game with real-time elements, asterisk, 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 and I first heard about it when trying to install a similar game called Songs of Conquest. I managed to get converted over to trying Songs of Silence instead. I'll get to Songs of Conquest one day. I actually think it's better than this, but not in every way. Songs of Silence impressed me, basically. It's got some stuff that no one does, and it's got some stuff that made me have small meltdowns, meaning we've got all kind of things to talk about today. Basically, it's a fantasy turn-based strategy game, very, very vaguely like Heroes of Might and Magic. But I don't want to categorize it because I think this title has a decent enough identity to be its own thing. Yes, incredible, a game design analysis comment that doesn't say, "This is an X-like. It happens now and again." It's a game that's content-rich, partially because it's not very long, has compelling gameplay that had me drawn in more than most things I've played in recent memory, and has strikingly good art, to an outrageous degree, and even a degree that means I am going to complain about it. I can complain about anything, I assure you. I'll give you a commentary on the main campaign, the highs, the lows, and a load of topic asides where I dump my extended thoughts about one thing or another on you. A fine plan, you shout, and so let's get started and see what Songs of Silence is all about. First up, we've got the opening cutscene, which explains the game's very refreshing and original premise. Let's absorb what it is, then I'll start glazing it in a bit. We've got him, the magical force from which everything originates in one form or another, including humans. It's energy, basically. But these humans are missing something. Yes, the OG humans didn't need eyes, being at one with the universe and such. However, at some point, the gods came by, they saw humans, and decided to upgrade them with eyes, bringing them into the light world, now relying on their own brand of him, celestial power. And of course, now there are two kinds of magic and two kinds of human. They started killing each other relentlessly in a gigantic holy war, and there you have it. You could make a strategy game out of that. Or can you? And by the way, if everything's made of him, where did these not quite him-based gods come from? Cosmological and theological questions abound as the humans fight their epic holy war between man, god, cosmic primordial forces, new divine energy. There's even robots in there at one point. You could indeed put a game here. But actually, we're going to skip to the end of this part of the story and just say the celestial gods and the starborn humans 2.0 won this war. However, the original humans managed to hang on because some bright spark cast a spell that split reality into two variants, quarantining all of the starlight and celestial nonsense in one for the starborn, and the OG humans went to live in the dark world. Not that they possess the concept of dark, so it's just the normal world as far as they're concerned. So now we've got two planets, possibly more like two universes. Not sure if you can actually travel between them, other than through dimension bending, as we'll see later. So many cosmology PhDs are yet to be done in this setting. This might have been the end of the tale. However, then the Great Ones decided to invade the universe. Yes, that always stirs up the plot, doesn't it? I've used this one myself. Mysterious spheres, called purgatories, appear out of nowhere and eat up the him energy that the universe is made of, and then start delivering weird creatures from the void, made of the twisted him and bodies of the people the spheres consume, and that'll end up being a problem for new and old humans alike. And you could probably make a strategy game out of that. Should they have, though? That's a point I'll contend with in a bit. We do need to add the caveat, not hugely explained here, that a certain amount of both the old and new humans actually want the purgatories to consume all the him, out of a sort of apocalyptic religious fervor, and they form this third side in the conflict that is deliberately helping the void creatures conquer everything. They're called the Crusade, and yes, it's probably supposed to be an allegory for something else called a crusade, especially given that the Starborn and the Celestials are depicted as being the Catholic Church, essentially, throughout the game. We'll rant about that later, I'm sure. We can enjoy some artistic speculation. For now, we're in another, less interesting opening cutscene where the real premise of the game emerges. Sometime after all that War of the Gods stuff, the light world has been divided into thousands of feudal realms in a forever war with one another, and some of them have also been destroyed by the Crusaders, imposing a state the game calls silence, where all the HoMM is sucked out of the land, and it's generally uninhabitable, although you can put the HoMM back pretty easily as it turns out, so it's not a huge deal if you can conquer it again, we'll later learn. One kingdom in particular gets silenced, with the royal family dying in the battle to stem the Crusader advance, but some refugees escape under the leadership of the princess, now queen, Lorelei, who is the main character in the strategy game that will now commence. Very quickly we'll get to the guts of the game. You move a hero and their army around on the map with a load of towns to capture, and if you walk into enemy groups you start battles, like in Heroes of Might and Magic or even modern Total War games I guess. But the big gameplay make or break is what happens when you fight the enemy. The game is advertised as having real-time battles, and this is technically true, if you'll extend the idea that watching Lord of the Rings is technically you playing a real-time strategy game, by which I'm trying to insufferably communicate that the battles are automated. Your role is to play certain cards to do certain things. So yes, combat is very God's eye view. You make things happen like heal here, damage here, and if you're lucky, you can have a unit or two follow a move order, but you do need to be quite lucky for that. It's not really a giving orders type of game. It's kind of strategy only. The tactics part of strategy is more up to fate. And in some ways that's more realistic, in others it's less of a game, and there's plenty to say about all of this. We'll dive into that discussion later, plenty of chances. For now, let me set up the premise of this first campaign mission. We wandered into a neighbouring kingdom to seek refuge, and they essentially said fine, but only if we join their war against another neighbouring kingdom, so now we shall be heading north in tandem with the Silberstein forces. We'll look at the details of how we move around and pick our battles, as it does matter a fair bit. But first, before we forget, let me tell you about Topic: the second most important war of all time. I originally wanted to start out my rants by glazing the plot and the setting for this game, but I'm going to save that for later, in order to highlight a misgiving that is most relevant right here at the very start. Remember that cutscene a minute ago? That looked important. My misgiving is simply that there is a slight bait and switch between the epic War of the Gods to decide the fate of the universe, which is all done and dusted now, and then we transition into that second opening cutscene. All the stakes are way lower, they're basically gone. The game mechanics aren't really suited to depicting a war between all civilization and the gods and all of reality. I'll grant you that, but my personal take is that possibly the game should have mentioned that this stuff happened less. Because in showing it off for like 10 seconds, it's like, oh my god, it's the highest stakes strategy game scenario of all time, and then it switches to, and then, 1,000 years later, 1,000 random baronies have a problem, and one of the nobles is going to solve it by fighting armies with like 100 guys max. And that's where you come in. As I'll explain later, I really like the premise, the scenario, and the backstory to this game. So can we get like an actual Total War-like somehow a Supreme Commander-like as well, I still want that, depicting the War of the Gods. Throw the Void Beasts into that as well. That's an easy as pie retcon. Boom! You've got a 3-faction RTS. The classic formula has been satisfied. We've only just started Songs of Silence. I'm already thinking about its sequel, Songs of Extreme Volume, Ear Protection Recommended Edition. So anyway, forget all that stuff, and pre-forget the claims I'm going to make about this being a fantasy setting that's actually really original and not derivative, because it turns out there's a world of medieval Catholic baronies fighting for territory with a soft dose of magic thrown in. Try to remember this is secretly part of a cooler story, and I'll start making claims regarding that later. So we've got to throw our army against a besieging force to save a city. If the battles basically play themselves, then is all we actually do point at them and wait for the cutscene to end? Well, yes, sometimes the game is actually like that. And it's good and bad, we'll get to it, but here I'll show you one way to affect the outcome of battles. You're free to look at enemy armies and see their formations, and then adjust yours accordingly before the battle starts. You can also, by the way, look at the detailed stats of the units, but that's a whole thing to talk about another time. As a new player, presuming you don't know any of the stats, you can at least arrange your units into lanes that might cause you to have a nice matchup, like your knights into the enemy archers, something like that. It's a little bit like the battle strategy of the Dominions series, if anyone's familiar with that. I can't commit though and say, this is how you play, because it will be very clear that battles are actually a massive mess. They don't take place in the neat lanes where your original formation has heavy influence over what happens. The units are free to move anywhere. They pick their targets based on whatever runs through their sweet little scripts. And some units can jump back and forth and generally do anything. Some of the cards you play in battle are indeed doing just that, such as the cavalry charge card I'll be using heavily throughout the game. That's one move order you can give every 30 to 40 seconds or so. If anyone remembers how mad I got at Star Sector for limiting how many inputs it lets you make during the real-time battles, this is way worse in that regard, so surely I'm furious. Well, we'll see about that. The point is, you can adjust your formations, but by and large I didn't, and by and large, whatever you scheme up will be demolished in seconds. You can imagine a stricter version of the game's battle system, where everything has to stay in its lane for the most part, so the formations matter way more. It certainly wouldn't make any sense, but it would be more of a game, more puzzle strategy-ish. Anyway, we did it, / witnessed it being done, and now we can level up. Leveling up your heroes lets you have an extra unit or two in their army, so basically high-level heroes are way better than low-level ones for that reason alone. And you also get an extra card. The card can be something to use in battle, it might be a building you play on a town on the map to buff it, or it can be a duplicate which improves an existing card a little. Broadly speaking, my strategy sense is that taking a duplicate is a massive mistake. The power increases are way too small to offset the chance to get a whole extra move with its own effects, and most importantly, its own cooldown. Like, you get some more game if you never pick the duplicate, so you can just do more stuff. And that will prove better than the cooldown on something going from like 40 seconds to 35 seconds. Those are the sorts of upgrades you get if you take a duplicate. The card I picked here in Camp Army is probably my favourite card in the game, and I sensed it was going to be something special right away. It heals you and makes you immune to ambushing, i.e. it's an anti-overextension card, perfect for rush strategies and generally being hyper-aggressive. And as I always preach on this channel, while it sounds harder to play hyper-aggressive, it's virtually always the easy mode in strategy games, so gaining the ability to heal anywhere and ignore the game's quite nifty rules about getting ambushed if you overextend means we're already in business. After the capture, we have to basically capture the rest of the map. Lots of work ahead, but for now I'm poking about the UI. Towns are also controlled by a card system, although it works differently, where the town generates each playable card once per turn, and you pay a cost, and it's shown slightly confusingly in a part of the screen somewhat near a thing covering all the battle cards of the garrisoned hero, which by and large you can't use on this screen and don't necessarily need to be able to see them. I guess this is slightly conceptually messy, having two different card-playing mechanics that work differently and apply to different things, but shown together on one UI. I can see the need for it because sometimes a hero has a card that recruits a unit in a town, and you play it from that screen. But also you can't otherwise look at heroes who are garrisoned. There isn't a UI for looking at an army inside of a town. So the usual army UI goes away with towns and kind of merges with the town UI, in a way I do remember finding confusing for a decent while. In fact, let's throw all of my UI concerns down the line for later, or even just never, because I want to rant instead about something that's much more in your face about this game. Topic: the art in this game is actually god tier. I'm sitting here looking back on the game and I'm asking myself one question. Does any game exist that has better art than Songs of Silence? There must be, but I can't think of it. The aesthetic and designs of everything, how it's presented and used, this gritty yet colourful world it depicts, absolutely elevates what is otherwise a somewhat cutesy, chibi, even mobile gamey visual style. I'll note the studio that made this has a history of forgotten commercial tie-in mobile games, basically nothing in the A tier of development, and this artistic elevation they've got here goes so far that now I'm sat here trying to avoid saying that this game has the best art of any game. Especially the art we'll see later for the Void creatures and their Crusader friends. It's just like, well, we're not fighting orcs anymore. We're not playing a franchise based off some 1980s movie with rubber props and makeup. This is an actual fantasy world, a genuine vision of another world that doesn't have our cultural and design history. Again, I'm going to ask you to ignore that we're playing a medieval Catholic barony fighting other baronies. Because yes, my point here is at its weakest at the very beginning, and I suppose that's why I decided to make it here, because you're watching OffiD's Game Grounds. But if you've been looking at all the illustrations of these random people and buildings and landscapes that have come up so far, you probably get the gist that a definite vision for the world exists, and it's so wonderfully presented that I'm willing to forgive that using all of these giant illustrations is probably the reason the UI layout doesn't really work very well in many places, because they had to include these things, rant, rant, rant. I mentioned before that I would tell you why it's bad that the art is good, but I'm going to do that later when I'm feeling bored and I want to snatch some misery from the jaws of happiness. For now, just look at this nonsense. It's out of control how good it looks, and it's even more out of control how technically the game doesn't require it to look this good at all. I think this game got a boatload of money on Kickstarter, and there you have it, like just send the art budget to the moon and it delivered. But what about the game taking place behind all of these masterpieces? I guess we'd better look at that, since they made the mistake of making a game and not a visual novel. As you might have seen, taking towns is the same process as a field battle, so not much to cover there. However, sometimes you can also do a second battle for a town, or first battle in this case, as the initial occupation was uncontested. This extra battle is a so-called adventure. This is a strange mechanic because it's a little too vacuous to give it a name. It's just a single battle lasting a few seconds. And that's the beginning, middle, and end of our adventure. The twist is, you don't see what the enemy force will be. In practice, we can rely on good old-fashioned metagame design knowledge here to guess that a force capable of taking a town is probably able to do the adventure, because if it wasn't, you'd essentially be putting a bag over the player's head and beating them by asking them to do this. And then they'll just save scum it, because if you actually lose a battle, the consequences are too great, and we'll cover that concept another time. Adventures generally reward you with extra units, or bonus units like the glowing green rat pig creature on the left here. That creature sits in our army's reserve and provides a buff to certain units. Let's leave it at that. What kind of buff? Well, we'll talk about stuff like that when we have to divert our eyes from all of the beautiful artwork. And note that each portrait is surrounded by a load of numbers and icons. Yes, the units have stats, and I found myself ultimately thinking, maybe it would be better if they just didn't. I'll try to explain. At first, I was looking closely at the stats of the units, and the game does make it really easy to understand this at a surface level. You only have two main stats, health and power. This isn't your 20-stat Total War mess of a unit classification system. It's really compressed down, as suits a game that's very quick and hands-off with the combat, I think. To the extent you could probably compress it even more, and I'll get to that. The way they achieved such simplicity is to have the power stat represent both hit chance, block chance, and damage. So when two models meet in battle, it compares their power, and the higher number is more likely to land an attack, and then it does that power level's worth of damage. AKA low power units don't attack and don't do anything when they do attack. The meta is simple then, high power. Topic: The stats/detailed interaction of units are a huge mess. There are 3 things that prevent you from taking your nice power and health unit stats and turning this into a Magic the Gathering style combat puzzle situation. Number 1. You can't control things. As you might guess, this allusion to a puzzle combat game I'm trying to make won't really work because you don't really make enough inputs to combat to say that the outcome was really your decision. Number 2. Power changes based on loads of things. Let's pretend thing number 1 wasn't true. Your power level on each unit is still going to be constantly changing. The battlefield, the hero in command, special units, and some unit traits will alter the power of either single units or all units with a certain trait in certain situations. Sometimes this is easy, so you can see that all of your units with a certain trait before a battle actually have 7 power instead of 4, for some reason. You don't even have to look up the reason, it just tells you it's got more power, and there you have it. But power changes during combat based on your use of cards, the enemy's use of cards, and on what the units are currently fighting. Some things are based on class matchups, if you like cavalry does less damage to spear infantry, things like that, and it works that out through some sort of power change behind the scenes. And there isn't a UI showing you all of that happening or what stuff does. So the bigger the battle, the more any analysis of stat matchups is going to start going out the window. But actually it's the next thing that really makes this the case. Number 3, the unit traits change things in really hard to read and know ways. All of the units and heroes have keywords attached to them. I think an early example we had was that certain units have the Guardian keyword, and we also got a bonus unit that gives +1 power to all Guardians, things like that. That's easy enough once again, but things will get funky when we consider the long list of traits that change the combat mechanics away from a simple comparison of power levels. For example, off the top of my head, I remember there are traits some units have that change how many attacks you make per attempt. And there are traits that let you evade X% of attacks, there are traits that give you an X% chance to block attacks, there are traits that make your attacks impossible to evade or block against certain enemy types, there are traits that increase your health when you attack, there are traits that lower enemy morale and make them disengage from you, there are traits that make you immune to XYZ effects of the other traits. Then there are traits where the unit has unusual behavior like summoning extra units in battle or attacking more than one target at once, and just any sense you might have been trying to get about what this stat, power, will mean for any given second of combat is totally washed away. In other words, these brawls actually do have a pretty deep combat system behind them, with complex conditional interactions of ever-changing stats and traits unique to each unit. And the traits then have levels too, by the way. Like if you have Annihilation 1, which is to do 2 extra damage, you can get Annihilation 2 to do 3 extra damage, things like that. So yes, in terms of unit design, they have a very broad palette for what specifically any unit can do. It's only in practice you can see what the battles are. Everything just runs at each other and it's over quickly. It's hard to really appreciate or ever notice at all that cavalry attacks can't be blocked for the first 5 seconds of combat, or that flying units have a 20% chance to evade any unit with the slow keyword, or whatever the detailed system in the background actually is. It's definitely got potential, and the analogy to Magic the Gathering is actually pretty strong here. Sorry if you haven't played that game, it's like this, but way slower, that's the key. This game is like 2 players throwing their decks at each other, and the judge just starts mashing things into combat and triggering their special abilities all over the place, and you just hope for the best. Basically, they've accidentally made the mechanics for a slow, turn-based tactics game with long, detailed consideration of unit matchups. But ain't nobody got time for that, and I really do appreciate that we basically skip all the battles in this game. Because I am an attention-deficited, always supposed to be doing something else kind of gamer, I only want to flag that you could have made a deeper game here, and they kind of did too, just secretly. Ultimately, you can probably tone down the complexity of combat, and a load of noobs like me won't be able to tell the difference. In other words, all of that complexity doesn't quote-unquote do anything, like you can't tell what it's doing. What they could do now though is take what they do have here and make Songs of Silence tactics, like without having to change much, which is neat. In the meantime, I just learned to stop ever looking at the stats at one point. I definitely never looked at the traits for any unit, ally or enemy, beyond the first couple of sessions. And that works fine. Really, the game doesn't seem set up to do things any other way, despite how they've designed the mechanics. I am on normal difficulty though, perhaps on hard, a more studious approach would come into view. I will leave that possibility open, although given how the battles go, I just can't see very much gameplay or very much strategy emerging from all of these unit traits and stats and their interactions. Here I am marching up to another Misk location, and this one is a temple-type town. There are various types of town that give you different currencies. Currencies being the things in the top left. We're not talking about that. We're not even talking about how we're here fighting luminants, forces of the gods themselves, with more ridiculously good designs. Not even talking about how good the designs are. So what am I talking about then? Some gameplay. It happens now and again, with both possible interpretations of the word "it" in that sentence being valid, as I'm slaughtering the servants of the gods in order to gain more favor points. No, stop thinking about how that's supposed to work. It just does. I'm also occasionally making a gameplay input. In particular, I use Lorelai's heal ability to restore health and resurrect fallen soldiers. This ability really matters, but in a bad way, so let me quickly vent about this. I realize this is actually a topic, so let's make it official. Topic: healing. Wah! This is a free replenishment kind of strategy game, or in other words, there is no long-term cost associated with taking losses. In theory, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Very much in the same vein as the free replenishment entries in the Total War series. So that means the overwhelmingly most important thing in battles is to avoid ever losing a full unit. If you have one archer alive, you can get all your archers back for free. If you have 0 archers alive, you have to pay, and you can only get them in certain places, and only once per turn, and it's just so much easier if you never lose a unit entirely. The problem with having a heal spell, then, is it means there are situations where the enemy's weak, and you can use battles to heal effectively, and you don't want the battles to end. You want the battle to drag on so you can heal as much as possible, and I just hate that kind of game feel. You see it now and again in gaming. There's a kind of Ludo dissonance where I have to play in a certain way to use this mechanic the game's given me because it has this arbitrary restriction attached to it. And it doesn't feel good. It would feel worse though, I suppose, if you were actually controlling the fight here, because you would put forward a unit that has enough of a power stat and a low probability of ever taking damage to just sit there, and then everything goes into the corner and heals over and over again to restore your army to full strength. You would be kind of obliged to do this now and again because it's so powerful, but it would feel bad to do so, that's what I'm saying. Right now, it's not that exploity, it's not that bad. But I did want to say it feels bad to win a battle sometimes because you miss out on the ability to heal. And it raises the Ludo dissonance I just referred to, the question of what the card even is in the world. Like, why can't I heal at other times or in other circumstances? Maybe it's because the gods only like violence and they won't heal you unless someone's being killed nearby. Even if that someone is their own worshippers, their own angels on the steps of their very own temples. Well, I know the score with the celestial gods already, don't I? They're secretly evil. I think the game might slightly wish to imply this, and I've inferred even further beyond. So healing is basically too good to be allowed. I think that's my comment. But I also want to plant a certain seed within you, but don't get too excited. That seed is that in a game where it overwhelmingly matters that you keep your units alive, you keep every unit alive, and prevent weak units from seeing combat, could it then be more frustrating to not have control of those units? And would that become only more frustrating the more immersed you are, and the more tense the strategic situation is? We begin to imagine why having the hyper-specific details of these fights really matter could clash with you viewing the battle through a wall of soundproof glass through which you scream fruitlessly at your suicidal troops. Just a thought for now. We've nearly won. The enemy are down to their capital. They threw the army they'd gathered against my second army, which was sitting in a town, giving it some extra power and some free garrison units, meaning we got a good show of it. We also have luminant archers on our side, among the best units in the game as it turns out. Infinite range, high DPS units that come in very handy. I'll touch on unit meta later on, although it doesn't really matter very much in my ultimate experience. Let's learn another lesson here at the end of the mission. We have their capital besieged. Some settlements require a few turns of siege before you can fight, but there aren't any siege mechanics. That is to say, the battlefield is still a field battle. You simply wait a few turns before the fight, perhaps simulating that you tore down their walls. So we've sorted that out. Only, the enemy force looks kinda strong. The game is trying to get you to learn something that I'm reluctantly picking up on here, although I'm desperately searching the tutorial codexes for a way to avoid it. That lesson is that sometimes you have to sacrifice an army to weaken the enemy enough to kill them. And the reason for that is armies can't work together. Two armies next to each other can't pool their units for battle. Meaning, massing numbers across several heroes is particularly weak. Broadly speaking, you want to place all your units in one army and only fill out the other armies if you have spare resources. That not only lets you have battles with as much strength as possible, but focusing on using one hero for everything levels them up faster. And level determines how many units you can have, so you can see there is a spiral of advantage to focusing entirely on having one hero do everything. In this campaign that's going to be Lorelei for the most part, although as a caveat, there is a level cap per mission. So you can't grind or anything like that. It reminds me of Battle for Middle-earth, which I guess technically means I have to say this mechanic is good. That's just the rules. But I still wished it wasn't capped. I wanted one strong hero and the rest weak, so I could do a death ball build for the campaign. But yes, campaign builds implies persistency, and that's something we need to talk about. First, I'll note we ended up actually winning with the first army somehow. The thing to remember is that all the fighting down there is ultimately RNG based, in an unseen, uncommunicated to the player sort of way. So maybe we got some good early rolls and beat the system. We're going to be deliberately not looking at how the combat works, in order to make some sort of point via the absence of points for this commentary, so enjoy not enjoying that. We did take a load of losses, but does that matter? We'll find out very quickly, so let's talk persistency mechanics. Buildings and troops are not persistent between missions, or even sometimes between quests within missions, but hero level and their available cards are. How did I find that out? The hard way. I'm going to talk about this fully in a sec actually. For now, all I mean to say is that the losses we take here don't matter anymore, because we're about to be given a new scripted army for the next quest. We have to escape this place we just conquered, because our new allies turned on us immediately. We'll try our luck moving east into some silenced land, which first means fighting an army of zombie ghosts blocking our path. This is what the Void Gods do to life, turning them into jellyish monsters, who then get employed by these other immortal beings called Light Eaters, who I don't understand because I think the part where the game explained how they work, well, we'll see in a moment what the problem was with that part. What I really want to know is what the Void Gods get out of creating all this silence, because if they're supposed to feed on him, like life energy, shouldn't they be keeping the world alive to farm living beings off it? Maybe they have other universes to go to next, but they should be just killing us now and again so they can last forever, like the flu or something. I shall defeat the forces of the all-consuming void with facts and logic. Facts don't care about the Great One's feelings, but the Great Ones were around before facts were invented, and they'll be here long after the last true statement is ever uttered. And that's the end of Mission 1 in the campaign. Aside from praising the Great Ones, I wanted to show off a very cheeky yet considerate move the game now makes. For Mission 2, it comes with a note saying you don't really have to play it if you don't want to. It explains it's another plot-focused, detailed tutorial mission, and the real spirit of the game won't return until Mission 3, so maybe just skip there for more gameplay. And I thought, well, alright, I'll call your bluff. I will skip the tutorial just to see if it screws me over in some way. And yes, I think the stuff about light eaters and zombies, gestalts as the game calls them, might have been in there, and all the characters already know about them, so it's not going to be explained again. Some people get turned into these pink skeleton ghosts, who then serve these big yellow ghosts, and in some way they form a spooky form of civilization that carries on in the Silenced realms, I guess. Not really our bag, so let's just awaken from the nightmare immediately. Therefore we appear after Lorelei and company travel through the Silent area, arriving somewhere else in the world, in a spot where a kingdom once existed yet is now gone, leaving the land ripe for us to set up something here. You might have seen a shiny bird that led us here. That's the influence of the deceiver gods, the Celestials, trying to get us to survive, probably because they actually are keeping us alive like cattle in a vampire lord sort of way. But enough blasphemy for now. While I set up for mission 3, let's go back to topic: persistency in a long video game campaign. I like it when things you do in a game persist throughout, but I also always complain about it, because the way this is done so often begins to clash with something. And that something is often the developers themselves. Songs of Silence does not let you keep any achievements you make, even when it really looks like it should, and that's very unrewarding, but maybe they have no choice, as persistency and game design itself just don't mix very well, unfortunately. What I mean by that is, the thing I was ranting about somewhere in my 7-hour meltdown over Terminator Dark Fate Defiance, if you let players' achievements stand, it becomes impossible for the developers to know what position the player is in at any given time. Itself, that's not a problem, but it is when the developers really want to add scripted challenges. There's our issue. That game, and indeed Songs of Silence, is a game that theoretically can be run dynamically, with both sides playing by the same rules of resources and recruitment. It doesn't though. Everything is scripted, and that means if you want to make a certain part hard or easy, if you want to have any control over what the player experience will be, you can't let the world be changed by the player's prior actions. Therefore, I have this invincible Omni complaint here, where I'm mad that the game deletes your units and buildings at checkpoints, and I would also be mad if it let me have whatever army I could make and then didn't have anything dynamic to account for this, i.e. a level scaling style system that makes the later missions harder if you brought a massive army from the earlier ones, and then I can also be mad at that because it's always easy to be mad at level scaling. There is absolutely no escaping the Omni complaint. And video games that are attempting both persistency and strict control over what's happening at certain points feels like they just have to fall into this trap. There are two ways to solve this, the easy way and the hard way. The easy way is you place a mountain of limitations on the player, such that doing well doesn't really help you very much. For example, in Songs of Silence, you can only have a few units maximum. So if you're managing your economy and picking battles well enough to theoretically have a massive number of units, you actually can't. This keeps the developers somewhat in the know about the vague power level the player can have, if they even let them keep their persistent armies, which they don't in Songs of Silence, so they've got all the bases covered here. A nice, hard, arbitrary, quasi-bullshit reason why you can't be as powerful as the mechanics and your performance allow. This is easy to implement, unfun to experience, but maybe you as a designer will make that trade-off worth it to allow persistence in some way. A softer example is something like the Stalker games, where every bullet you pick up can be used later. Your inventory represents your power, but they have weight and they take up space, so you're soft limited in how much power you can gain via extreme shooting skill. And that approach feels more fun because there is an understandable reason why you can't have infinite ammo, contrasting with other shooters like Halo or something, where they just say, well, you can hold 600 bullets, and that's a hard limit. There's no reason for us to have picked that number. You aren't involved in the decision yourself, your skill isn't involved, you don't see why it's happening. In Songs of Silence, that would translate to having there be no army size cap, but then having upkeep costs instead, something like that, some mechanical reason why you don't want a massive army, and the developers have to tweak that to make you end up having about the same army size as their arbitrary limit would have given you. This then leaves you with the challenge of trying to tweak the game such that the player will probably end up doing what you wanted them to anyway for your set piece you had in mind. But, well, I guess there's the problem. Like, if you are fretting over control of the player experience for a set piece, and that's a concern, and you're starting to design the game around that to avoid any problems coming up, maybe you just didn't want to do persistency in the first place. As indeed could be the case with this game. Maybe this game needed to have no plot battles or like plot events whatsoever, or it needed to be a series of combat puzzles with cutscenes in between, and like it doesn't have a 4x section that doesn't really do anything in between the actually relevant battles. What's the hard way of solving this problem then? Well, the source of all persistency versus balancing versus player experience versus developer knowledge and control battles is one simple thing: a discrete ending. I mean discrete in the annoying scientific way, that is to say, the ending states of the game don't exist on some continuous spectrum. It's not possible to reach the end of the game and see that what you achieved is itself the ending, because usually a game wants a specific scripted ending, and they'll throw up a final exam of a set difficulty to see if you're worthy of it, and to do that they need to guess how much you achieved up to the beginning of the exam to tune the difficulty, assuming they do insist that it has a particular difficulty, that is. And if they really want that, what they could do is have a non-persistent game state, so they can control and tune everything. A vague example of this could be the Citadel from Half-Life 2, where the developers can take control of the game and make all of the ammo management and weapon choices stop making your life easier or harder, and you limit the map to corridors, and now you suddenly know exactly what the player's doing and what they can do, what's reasonable to expect them to achieve, and you can start crafting a specific experience based around that limitation. The other side of this coin is the hard way of allowing full persistency. We finally got there. Let the player be as powerful or as weak as their play merits, and then, somehow, all caps somehow, not let the game become soft-locked or too hard or too easy per se. It just progresses to a different end if you can't or can do thing X, Y, or Z. This is a big ask, tantamount to saying the game should have a theoretically infinite number of endings based on how far you get and just not expecting the player to reach any particular one. Perhaps an example of this is Crusader Kings, where it's not really directing you to do very much, and at the end state, what the game's like is entirely left up to whatever you manage to make out of it along the way. Outside of sandbox games, doing this will get difficult though. There's an endless ocean of possibilities in terms of how scripted versus dynamic you want to make your game. And a non-open world, non-sandbox game needs to have branching paths deliberately written in instead, which is really annoying, but remains infinitely popular as a mechanic or as a way of making a game, if only because it's so rare. Think Fallout New Vegas, basically. I'm essentially reaching for this game design cheat mode, where we claim we don't have to do any balancing, because all results of all challenges are all valid paths to something, like in real life and stuff. The goal is to have a persistent campaign system, where if you throw some challenge at the player, and they can't do it, like you as a designer don't have to worry about that at all. It just simply tips the player towards a different ending, rather than necessitating them potentially playing the whole game again to get back to that challenge in a stronger state because they have to pass it. I want something where the feeling is more like, I made it to the end. I look at the ending state and I think, I want this to be better, I know it can be better, so I play the game again, but this time, it's not a bitter repeat forced by failure, it's exploration on my part. I'm trying to play to achieve a particular thing that the game doesn't demand, thus making it my choice and my achievement, making the campaign my campaign. It's a free immersion generator. And by free, I mean the most expensive game design you could possibly imagine. And having made this speech to the Songs of Silence producers, they look at each other and say, let's just delete the player army every hour or so and have every battle that advances the plot just be scripted. And they nod, and hence the studio is not bankrupted, and we're back to reality. And while I'm mad, I sympathize. Balancing and designing a persistent campaign in any type of game is hard, and in strategy games, which are basically number comparison simulators, where positive feedback loops reign supreme over the design. You have to pull so many gimmicks and tricks to control the game experience or force something to happen while maintaining a veneer of all routes being valid. You'll end up with just Total War Attila, and that makes me sad. Don't worry about what I'm referring to here. A trauma from a different era is emerging. Sorry for going off topic. I'm dreaming. Let's go back to the game. I don't think I even made whatever my point was here, but in real life there are many paths to many ends, and you don't always get the ending you were going for. And maybe that was the point. Let's just try and keep the other topics more on topic as a special treat. We've done a good job of conquering a load of empty or petty warlord-controlled towns and establishing ourselves on the map. We're supposed to go south here and finish off those hostile warlords, but I got distracted by the fact there is a massive hostile city right next to our new capital. We learned this place is controlled by the Savages. Who are they? They are none other than the Firstborn, the original humans, some of which have been sneaking back into the Light Realm to start recolonizing places. Lorelei says, we better not attack them. However, I pulled out the old nah I'd win and besieged their city anyway, because it would be nice to have it. This aggroes their faction onto us, revealing they have a load more stuff back there in the fog of war, and soon after I spot two armies coming at me from over there. For a first-time player, it's really impossible to know whether or not this is a problem. You can look at their units. You always have full intel on the enemy, but making a stat and trait comparison with yours can be tricky. Really, the best approach is to rely on numbers, and later you'll get a feel for what units are basically nothing and what units are massive problems. Well, I plough on in with Lorelei and things go well enough, so we've captured the city. Although we do end up under siege ourselves pretty much instantly. What you're supposed to do here is go south, but because I've started this nonsense, I have to dedicate my second force to only defending against the constant attacks coming from the south. This is a little risky because we don't really have the strength to fight in two directions. However, we are defending a choke point, and we know the enemy will always have to attack in one place in particular, so we can just place garrison units there and get around the unit limits of our inferior second commander. That is to say, you can place units in towns as if they were armies, and then battles taking place in the town includes those units and any army also stationed there, so your side will be bigger if you defend a town, basically, just makes it easier, and that's what we're doing. We'll leave that to hope it works out, and for the Firstborn, well, we can simply sally against them because they are split into two groups right now, and of course those groups can't reinforce each other in this game, as discussed, making them weaker than they look here. It looks like I've already developed the battle strategy that I used to unlimited success for the entire campaign, so I might as well tell you about it now. Then you can trust that I never came up with anything better, so don't worry if I never mention my plans again. First is the army composition. Spam cavalry units. Cavalry move faster on the campaign map, but we'll talk about campaign map strategy tips later. In battle, Lorelei provides a buff to cavalry, so that's a good start, but she also has 3 cards that synergize extremely well with a cavalry-only force. First is the charge card, which makes cavalry charge even if they can't get a run-up, and cav units usually have a trait where they do extra damage when charging or have unblockable attacks, good stuff like that. And of course they have a regular charge, where they get a buff as they enter combat if they've had enough of a run-up for it. Then there is the other charge card, a card that makes the whole cavalry portion of the army, i.e. the whole army here, charge at light speed to a given point, because the lightspeed charge also removes the collision on your units for a second or two, and they all clip into each other as the animation ends. That means your whole army stands in a tiny area, and that area can be exactly where you dump your heal card to revive and heal the whole thing. I wasn't doing it exactly right here, but later I would also save my heal to combo with the charge, and the usual result is you end battles with absolutely no casualties, and sometimes you'll even come away with more troops than you went in with if things go very well. And because these cav units have high stats to begin with, they tend to survive, and this all synergizes into a cav death ball that can't really be stopped, other than the game occasionally deleting it, as previously ranted about. There are only 2 things that hold me back now. One is that some units can't be damaged by charging and or get bonus stats against cavalry. What we're going to do about that is not even notice, because I'm not looking at the enemy stats closely enough. We'll just hope things work out. Thing 2 is that every time you win a battle, it does drain your movement points, even if you fought while stationary at the start of your turn, such as clearing out a siege. That means the enemy gets time to build back if you win a defensive engagement. So counterattacking after a win isn't quite as powerful as it could be, and you can't flatten multiple armies per turn or anything like that, so overall deathballing isn't as good as in Total War, for example. All that said, we're here at their capital, and one thing I wanted to mention is that the firstborn leader here has a Welsh accent. And I thought they were going to do something with this, where the firstborn were all Welsh, perhaps to portray the starborn on firstborn oppression as an Anglo-Norman accent versus Celtic accent voice acting divide. But actually it was just random. The main firstborn character we'll meet has an American accent. Would the game be better if they had an all-Welsh main faction? Absolutely. That's a point out of 10 knocked off the scale. While besieging the Welsh betas, I also managed to do the main thing, sending our second army of trash to go south, and advance upon the Green Raider faction, managing to set up a base right outside their castle. Then back to not Wales, we plough in for battle, in which the Ball of Death will do its thing, delayed only by the enemy constantly summoning these walking tower things called constructs. The firstborn have a kind of techno-magic that we dirty celestial worshippers forgot about at some point. So yes, they have this unique design aesthetic where they aren't quite mechanized, but they have machines and industry, because to them it's kind of like everything is made of the same unifying force, the hymn, everything's a bit alive. So they can conceive of and indeed command towers of rock that move around and do things. It's actually very cool and underexplored by the game itself, I would say, let alone underexplored as a concept in generic medieval fantasy with magic settings. As I hoped, taking out the firstborn capital also takes out all of their territory, so now the map is ours to claim, and we can finish off the mission at our leisure. A couple of points to mention now so as not to have to talk about them again. One is that the secret to Lorelei's success is the combo here where you can recruit Hearthguard, our second worst unit, and then you can use one of her level up unlocks to promote them to Honor Guard, one of the best units. And overall it's a pretty cheap and easy deal that's more practical than actually recruiting good units the normal way, which requires certain settlement types or buildings present, so I can spam this to keep our death ball going strong, even if Cav can't be recruited, which is most of the time actually. The second point is that I left some Cav behind in that city, and that is because of neutral armies. All maps are covered in so-called neutral armies. However, the neutral faction will attack you. It's very wrongly named or wrongly translated here, I don't know what's going on. If I understand correctly, they're supposed to be hostile to all factions. However, I've only ever seen them attack the player. I think secretly they're just another enemy faction. Neutral armies attack you if you move close to them, and they will capture any locations you leave ungarrisoned. And that's the key. If there is a garrison, no matter how weak it is, the neutral faction will leave that town alone. They only ever try to get it for free. They won't challenge your settlements. Therefore, whenever I take a place, I have to recruit something or leave something behind from the army to prevent a random, sentient tree just spawning nearby and then conquering the city. But yes, it does function as a slight anti-snowball mechanic, or an overextension simulator, as in if you conquer a lot of things quickly, you need the resources to build units just as quickly, and all locations don't let you build on the first turn you take them, so for real speed, you have to shave your army down as you advance. We've slaughtered our way through the Green Bandit faction, and in the final battle you might have seen they had trebuchets blasting away at us. This reveals one of the big frustrations of the gameplay, or the big frustration really. If you can't give orders, you can't stop easy-to-solve problems from persisting. I could split one unit from the 10 squads in this death ball and engage the trebuchet in melee, negating it entirely. Instead, I have to watch it blasting away and pray our ball might split apart on its own, or somehow notice the problem. Let's try not to worry about that for now, and celebrate our victory over the bandits, who had South North American accents. For some reason, the kingdom of the banjo has fallen to we well-spoken types with South North European accents, and all is well at last. Is that the end of Lorelai's story? No, because now something we missed by not playing the second campaign mission comes up. A sinister, ghost-like individual is being all mysterious and G-Man-esque, to continue referencing Half-Life. He does something to the celestial bird that guides Lorelai from war crime to war crime, such that it will now one day lead her to him. And that will be that for now. With that sorted, let's take our newly established kingdom, and nope, we head to the next mission, where we now play as the secondary main character in the Dark Dimension. And while we will later return to our kingdom, it's a oops, we deleted everything kind of return where we're way weaker and smaller the next time you see it, because you don't deserve nice things, and because the world of gaming doesn't deserve persistence mechanics. For our sins, let's start a new project as this firstborn fellow Akkad, who has pretty much the same problem as Lorelai. A giant void is going around, consuming all the life energy in the world, and quite a few people have gone along with this plan and are helping them out. The Crusade are attacking the old race, our new faction. This is a long mission with the goal of first conquering the map, and then holding it against the Crusade for a while and generally failing where the plot needs you to fail. And there was some delay in getting started because I had to investigate both my units and those of the enemy. And I was trying not to be distracted by the high quality art and the creative designs, the unique lore, all accompanied by amazing music too, but I'll rant about the music way later on. As we build up our presence on the map, let me expand on the lore part of the previous sentence with
Topic: the originality of the setting, ignoring the fact I suddenly became ill. At the most passing possible glance, you see this medieval kingdom with magic vibe going on, and you think, well yes, it's another one of those. The problem with that is, it's actually more of a handhold of familiarity in a setting that's otherwise insane by the standards of fantasy. The elves don't have pointy ears anymore, they have no eyes instead and live on a neighbouring planet. The zombies are made of jelly and can combine into weird creatures, and speaking of weird creatures, the Great Ones are invading reality, and half the humans sided with them and have become pretty weird themselves. I was pleasantly surprised how it went from Catholic knight with a sword, to the world being over, to the strong implication that your gods might be the bad guys, if not for the presence of even worse guys and their pet black holes. There is a history here. There are, as the game says, 1,000 different kingdoms on Planet 1, who even knows what's going on Planet 2, and there are loads of little internal divisions and demi-humans and autonomous animal societies, and I thought, by the gods, they've done it. It's not Tolkien-esque, it's not Greek mythology. The two scenarios that humans are legally permitted to reference, they've barely done anything with that here. Now I bet I'll be embarrassed when you tell me this is based on some book that's really big in Germany and they stole all the ideas or what have you. But let me be naive for a moment. Let me praise the game scenario for being an original fantasy world, or an original feeling fantasy world to me specifically. A different kind of fantasy world, such that all the stuff attached to the words fantasy world can be ignored. Like, it's fantasy as in it's imaginative, not fantasy as in let's go to the Adventurers Guild and see an elf. Or like whatever the singularity of fantasy has become in this era where every fantasy story is just an isekai, or something that is pretending not to be an isekai because a gaijin wrote it, or what have you. I think I'm getting mad at something irrelevant here, so let's make a real point. The setting is almost offensively good, so how can I turn that into something to complain about for this video? Well, here's one idea I had. Because Songs of Silence is a strategy game, it means lore doesn't really impact the gameplay or the player in a way a more adventurous game would. The amazing innovations of the story will be let down by the cynical perspective that this game doesn't really need innovative world building, and it feels wasted. That's the complaint I can scrape together here. I would prefer something a little more in-depth with regards to lore use in gameplay. And I'm tempted to reference Spellforce here, the CRPG RTS hybrid games. I'm mad because I thought their world was good and I got immersed in it. And I now look back thinking, bah, it's a generic medieval fantasy with magic setting. Now I'm like, I want an RPG set in this world, the dual worlds, plus the Great Ones, plus 3 different brands of gods up to no good, and talking squirrels here and there too. I didn't really show you this, but there are talking squirrels and the like, don't worry about it. Songs of Silence doesn't really show off its setting very well, or much at all, by being a strategy game. It's a better vibes and story game than it is a strategy game. So I'm inclined to say that being a strategy game makes things worse. The opposite of what I say every time I play a non-strategy game on this channel. So no doubt if this was an RPG, I'd be wishing I could order units around and the endless cycle of the grass being greener in the other game design shall continue. I can't be satisfied, but let it be known that I thought the setting of the game was actually good TM. And I usually don't think that because I'm very jaded. The stamp of approval has been given. We're all waiting for the graphic novel version of this story to appear. And I guess I'll play this throw some numbers at them and see what happens type of strategy game we've got here in the meantime. During this stage, you will be attacked by powerful armies coming from the southeast, armies that respawn if you kill them. And before you think, well, that's some video game bullshizer, your armies also respawn if you lose them. It's Heroes of Might and Magic style shicer. So there's the excuse anyway. Doesn't actually make it the right choice, but it's a genre convention of sorts, a sub-genre convention, I guess. But also, you constantly lose your advantages anyway via the persistency deletion shenanigans. So it makes it somewhat fairer if things go badly, the game just says, no, it didn't, and puts you back and gives you your stuff back. All this isn't pictured here, of course, because I'm too good at the game to lose an army. And you might then ask how I know this happens, and I'm going to flee the courtroom screaming at that comment. This is a game where you as the player are generally in control of when and where to engage, so you can Sun Tzu it up by only ever fighting when it looks like you'll win, to never really get into sticky situations. You don't have to do any hard battles. If a town's too heavily guarded, you could just walk past it. Do you really need the +5 gold per turn it gives you? You really don't. I keep going off on rants on this one, and coughing fits, luckily they're being cut out. The point I wanted to make here is that this respawning horde of armies is trying to stop you from acquiring refugee camps on the map's peripheries, where you can get refugee units, and you have to keep them safe for some kind of reward later. The annoying aspect to this is that refugees count as a military unit, and they take up a slot in your armies, and you don't count as saving them. If you, say, move them into your castles and put them in the garrison, they have to be in the field army on the front line to be counted as protected for some reason, which I found out after wasting time trying to stash them somewhere safe, so that's what I'm trying to do. Ultimately, this second army in the southwest needs to stick around my core to defend against the enemy push, while the real army is out east somewhere looking for refugees, experience points, and another adventure to get bonus units. Akkad's army has a couple of units that provide constant healing on the campaign map, which are worth their weight in him since they allow you to never stop campaigning, getting some optimal strategy map movement, and emphasizing that if you don't fully kill me then you shouldn't have bothered type balancing that I so hate to go up against, but so love to have apply for me. I am invincible, I cry, as an enemy army actually storms in and kills off Akkad after a long battle. Yes, the Crusade are mainly coming from the south, although after a few turns of the mission, another powerful Crusade army actually spawns in the northeast, i.e. right next to where Akkad was. They immediately come in and kill me off, and there you have it. You don't always pick your battles, as I was previously claiming. The good news is the other army gets to fight the Southern Crusaders in a choke point with extra garrison units on our side, and during this battle, you can see all kinds of visual effects popping off, and that the enemy is playing their cards. Yes, when the enemy is led by a hero, they have cards in the same way that you do, which raises 2 points in my mind. One is that I'd love to see their hand, so to speak, so you can maybe play against it in some way. I think somewhere you might be able to look up what cards enemy heroes have, but I want to see it on the battle screen, since there's plenty of space around the edges after all. Point 2 is that they've made AI scripting for how to use cards automatically. So the game has the ability to be a full auto-battler with no player involvement. And yes, Lazy Devin kinda thinks I'd like to be able to turn that on for like one-sided battles at least. There are battles where it's easy enough that it doesn't really matter how you play your cards, and you could just skip through by speeding up time, which it does allow you to do, but it also feels dumb to not play your cards and just miss out on whatever small advantage that would give you. And since we can infer the game does have an automatic card playing system in it, maybe they should just give the player the option to let the AI play the cards for you if you can't be bothered, or just don't want to for whatever reason. And here is a card coming back. Play a card and you'll get him back not only for free, but with some units attached, very generous. Is there any problem you can't solve in this game by just playing a card? This game really wanted to put in some kind of deck builder tag in its bio on Steam, like for the marketing push or something, but without having any deck builder mechanics. So loads of normal menuing stuff is done via a card system, just for fun. And I guess it is fun, it's original. I only contend that it might actually be worse than a button with text saying what it does, because the card pictures aren't very clear. And you end up just going to tooltips with text to actually navigate what you're doing with them. Well, I'm too boring for this game. Maybe the art could pop up after you click the boring UX-y button that just says what it does without having to open a tooltip to see what it does first. I need to build my army back now and try to push out again. I'll be pushing north and discovering that this is the correct direction to go, in that some scripted events make the mission easier if you go this way first. Plus you avoid walking directly to where the enemy death ball spawns in the east. This game isn't too bad for scripted event shenanigans. It's usually pretty fair and consistent. I think this is the most trap-like mission. It's no Terminator Dark Fate Defiance, that's for sure, so I won't complain. However, I did start the mission again after discovering how correct going north was, so make of that what you will. This was the only time that happened as I recall. Essentially, if you go northwest, you can get some rebels to join you, giving you a free settlement. But it's not actually all that good because of one of the two gimmicks of the old race's faction. Let's take a look at these gimmicks, / listen to me reminiscing about these gimmicks. Gimmick 1. All your settlements need to be connected. You might have seen that golden line on the ground. You need to have any place you capture be within a certain radius of somewhere you also own to create this line. And without it, you don't get any resources from the disconnected settlements. Sometimes, including in this mission actually, some towns are too far apart to put the line down, limiting your strategic options for going out and taking distant settlements. For example, when this outcast settlement in the corner joins you, the way the map is arranged basically requires you to conquer all of the western half of the map to find a line of him juice that can reach it. This is the only time in the campaign I had any trouble with this mechanic. Otherwise, I don't remember it having any impact at all. It's hard to say if this gimmick matters. Aside from this one example where it definitely did, we'll have to check on that as we go on. And gimmick 2, pictured perhaps somewhere in the background, is that units can't always be recruited by ordinary means. The mainline infantry you get require you to upgrade lesser units, rather than being bought outright. For example, you buy civilians by playing one card, then turn them into warriors by playing another card, then turn them into a specialist unit by playing another. And these cards might only be available in different settlements, so it's a complicated process. This did actually impact the campaign a lot, because loads of settlements will only give you the second or third card in that chain. It was hard to start it, meaning you have to move an army through a particular series of settlements in practice to get any particular unit. The key to overcoming this was using the many special units that don't follow this rule, and of course there's also the ultimate tip, just never lose your units, because no matter whether you can recruit something, you can always heal a 90% dead unit of that thing anywhere, as mentioned before, as long as you keep them alive. So the inexplicable lack of ability to recruit civilians in half of your empire for some reason, for balancing purposes, will end up not being an issue. So how do you keep all your units alive in a game where you can't really control what happens in battles? Well, you ask too many questions. Anyway, so that's the old races for you. Whatever the case, all you want to do is get a big number and run at them, no matter what faction you could invent in this game. So it's just a matter of style and taste really, which one you do it with. This attempt at the mission is going better than before, with the west side of the map gradually falling to us, and our second army once again killing off the doom stack coming for our capital by holding a choke point. Here was the moment I got that hymn line through, now connected to our capital, so our economy will explode with loads of extra number. All of the stuff we've conquered finally does something all at once. And both armies are looking good. We're in a good spot now to get some max strength armies just clearing up the rest of the space. With almost ludo-narratively dissonant ease, the Crusaders really aren't putting that much pressure on us now. But we are not naive. We already know the game will pull out a you win, you lose cutscene, no matter what we do. So we just play along and win the prize of victory, that being defeat. While I do that, let me tell you about this. Topic: one-handed auto-battling versus sweaty gaming. Now, what does that topic title even mean? Well, it was a strange phenomena I ended up quite enjoying about the game, which is that the game, and especially the battles, can be played one-handed. I understand what it sounds like I'm saying with this, but I'm actually attempting to report an unexpected level of enjoyment I got from sitting there watching the battle play out, and planning when and where I would use my next card based on what was happening. When you think about it like that, it's less of an auto-battler, more of a rhythmic action or even fighting game kind of feel, where you're looking for chances and openings against this ever-shifting opponent. I found myself sitting there with my offhand on top of my head involuntarily. Somehow I was using it to steady myself and encourage concentration, like I was playing speed chess or something. And the point, I guess, is that normally when you play a game, you've got different operations happening on both hands, so to play a strategy game experience with one hand somehow did actually unlock more focus and concentration on me. I was really considering what that one hand was going to do. I don't know why, I don't know if it's just me. I wanted to report this finding in case anyone else knows at all what I'm talking about and might benefit from hearing that I experienced this phenomena that was a bit different in some way. I might be doing a roundabout way of saying the game was so boring that it was a novelty unto itself. I don't know. I've been gently joshing with the lack of interactivity in the battle system so far, haven't I? But the truth is, the fact you don't have to interact with it very much does give you a lot of leeway to get immersed in deciding what exactly the interaction will be and kind of watching what's actually happening more so than I usually do in games like this. And willing and praying for certain situations to arise. It's not quite the frustrating mess I would imagine it to be. Seeing this game design on paper, I kind of liked just praying for a good result. I don't know, I'm becoming a gambler. I was engaged, I was gawking, with one eye pressed into my elbow pit, and I found the few choices I had to be meaningful, more so than your everyday gameplay input. And that's why I didn't want to totally crash out over the lack of control in this game, which is what I was originally planning to do when I played the first hour. I was like, oh, it's an auto-battler, we can rant about this. I eventually found that having so little control can amplify the importance of every input you do have. Yes, I've got Stockholm Syndrome. I guess it's kind of analogous to chess, as I said, each move is important, they don't have to be very many moves. My theory is that the ability to play one-handed is somehow integral to this, with somehow in all caps. Because if you had both hands there ready to do something, I think the fact you're not really doing something would be more evident to your brain or something, or my brain. I don't really know what I'm getting at here, but I just feel like I'm getting at something, and we'll just put that down as another comment. There's another comment on the game. I am reminded again of Star Sector, a game where you could give RTS-style orders in battle, but only 4 or 5 times. And the lack of control was just agonizing to me. And I think that was because it was set against the backdrop of a game, where you also had real-time piloting control of your ships. So the analogy to Songs of Silence here would be, if you actually controlled your hero, like in an action game, but sometimes you stopped to play a card on the strategic level, and even though that sounds better, the contrast between the fine control and then being strapped to a chair and watching the AI ruin your life for a bit, makes that AI ruining your life feel more egregious, even if it actually isn't, because sometimes you are controlling what's going on. Whereas somehow, if you don't know any life outside of the chair, you become one with the process and learn to love only making inputs to the video game now and again. It's your boy Offidi back at it again with that Stockholm Syndrome gameplay commentary. For some reason, I liked this in the end, and I think it was something to do with the hands-off approach, allowing deeper analysis and thought, and also something to do with it being easy. Yes, I suspect all of my comments here would not apply, and I would just be raging the whole time if the battles didn't win themselves, not only play themselves. I think this whole shebang is very reliant on player-friendly balancing to avoid your lack of control becoming an issue. So I'm strapped to a chair watching an AI run my life, but to an acceptable standard. That's our metaphor here. I found myself not always dreading what the AI had in store for me next, and was sometimes interested to see what it had in store for me next. Which we probably won't be able to say in real life much longer, so let's just move on. There's something good about something that is bad about this game, I claim, evidence not provided. Eventually, with all refugees tucked into Akkad's reserves and the map secure, a big army starts moving on our capital, and you're tasked with escaping to the north. Our other units and remaining army stay behind to buy some time by doing nothing and just dying instantly, in another classic go on without us moment where actually there was enough time for everyone to go. We could probably have taken half the capital with us, really. I remember thinking that this story, with the old race's kingdom falling, is largely voluntary. They just sort of don't not fall, just because it seems like the thing to do. For some reason, only Akkad and a few outlanders get to escape. The rest of our civilians can sit and watch their army die, despite having like a million escape routes we just secured for them. Because it's our game, it's our rules, we give you freedom, and we shall take it away. It's cooler if everyone dies. So just leave, alright? Yes, I'm a bit of a hater here. I know doing it another way is basically impossible, but well, let me complain about it all the same. We do have a decent escape route because these black holes roaming about the place sometimes have an alternate use. They are safe to walk into, so they're less black holey than they look. And some of them simply transport you back to the light world. That's why the Firstborn had colonies for Lorelei to fight recently. We've gone through the very same portal. We didn't let anyone else do this because of the reasons, and now maybe we can stop the Crusade here, ? Of course, that's going to be the issue, isn't it? The Crusade can also come through these things, they'll just follow us. And indeed, they are already conquering this other world at the same time. So really, we're just changing the battlefield. We're going to have to stop and try to kill them at some point, which brings us to the business of this next mission. After getting over the annoyance of losing my army to the quest transition firewall, we meet up with the Welsh centaur I mentioned earlier, who leads what little remains of our light world colonies. Things don't look good. However, we decide we can bounce back if we activate a load of constructs located in nearby neutral settlements, constructs being the old race's less annoying to recruit units, such as the walking towers I mentioned before. So the mission becomes capturing all the nearby neutral settlements. Easy enough. As a reward for bringing the refugees here, we get a load of money. But that's not too helpful because money can't really be invested. To make a settlement better, you have to level it up through a combination of prosperity points, which generate automatically, and building materials, the other currency really. The meta is pretty simple. Level up settlements that give you building materials first to speed up the rest of the process as the mission progresses. What settlements will give you for resources is preset, although occasionally you can change it with buildings. And by and large, these considerations are outside of your strategy, as in like it's rarely possible to take two settlements at the same time and you have to pick which one you'll do first, things like that. Really, you just go for whatever one is available currently in the current turn. Whatever the closest settlement is, just take it right now. That's going to be the best thing to do. As long as you can put the hymn line down, of course, our added consideration with the old races, but you can in practice. On the military side, our strategy will be to have the centaur pull trucking duty. That is to say, we need one hero to simply ferry units to the main army. You can only recruit one thing per turn per place, meaning building up an army is slow. Too slow, it's not worth waiting around to do it. So instead we head out to fight early on, and have the centaur go back and forth dumping units in Akkad's army. This reveals an important subtlety to campaign map strategy in this game. Units have no movement limits, only the heroes do. So if I spend 10 movement points moving units up to the front, they can swap over to a new hero, and then inherit the movement from that hero and go back up to 10 again, allowing you to catapult armies long distances if heroes are in a chain between your best recruitment centers and the front. Essentially, that is the finesse of doing well against the scripted setups you'll face in these missions, making sure units are always at the front as much as possible. And having these ferry heroes to constantly move units up and the loot wagons back is the answer until you're all maxed out. We've taken the first of the places which gives you a free construct, a giant thing, pretty good. We can also recruit more of these outlander, outcast type firstborn, who are actually a bit more like fantasy elves, to slightly contradict my earlier glazing. The best thing, though, is that you get the outlander hero, who appears a few times in this campaign and is a quote-unquote fast hero, which means their maximum movement points goes up to 15. Having a 15 movement point hero that can move cavalry much faster and can just dash around redistributing units and money is really good. He also has the ability to add a building to settlements that massively increases your building materials income. So basically having this guy in your back lines, powering up your settlements and moving your stuff around, is really effective. He's the unsung hero of all the missions he's in. Do I remember his name, though? Well, no, this happened a long time ago in my defense. A hero as unsung as the great hymn being silenced before our eyes. Something, something. There's a lore reason. I can't be bothered to read the text on the screen. Merrin, that's what it says. And it's Merrin's moment to shine with more movement tech here. There is a neutral army I want to kill right outside the settlement, occupied by the main army. However, fighting a battle costs all of your movement, meaning to kill it I would have to not advance this turn, and that's a bad thing to do in a strategy game. Therefore, Merrin sweeps in, he takes all of Akkad's units and fights the battle. It's an easy win. Then Merrin and his new army is immobilized by that, but Akkad can sweep in and take all the units back. They inherit his movement points, so they're all back to full movement. And now we can go south to seek our next front one turn earlier than we would have otherwise. Looking for chances to do things like that is the route to success. I should mention I'm playing on normal difficulty, and my experience is that you don't really need to play with that level of finesse to win on normal difficulty, so I probably would have been fine to go on to hard. Although I have no idea what hard difficulty does. It's one of the games where in the start it says that hard difficulty is only for veterans of the game. Meaning, like, if it's your first time playing it, it's encouraging you not to go on to hard, and that makes me think, oh, okay. But if it had just said nothing, I probably would have picked hard. Because I do like to be under a little bit of pressure, and often because I'm like, you know, a pro gaming loser, playing on normal won't be enough for me. I can't get my kicks. I can't get Stockholm Syndrome out of a normal game. Anyway, here's one more example of some movement tech before I stop bother pointing it out. We've got trouble with the Starborn, the ones we were playing as before. They're still invading us from the south. So first I give the army to the Centaur, who spends her movement breaking a siege against one army. Then Merrin ferries everything back to Akkad, who can take the army back to our capital to break another siege all at once, and hence the turn-ending effects of battling are avoided. Now, can I just say, topic, is this exploit/workaround based movement system really okay? Just a little something I want to bring up, because this kind of movement tech is what being good at the campaign strategy looks like, I claim. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like an exploit you use to overcome an arbitrary rule going in the other direction. Let me explain what I think I mean by that. We have this rule where you can't move after battling, which is placed in the game to block your momentum. If you could freely move and fight, attacking would be easier and defending would be harder. This start-stop rule slows the pace of fighting to stop it outrunning the pace of the economy and recruitment. It's anti-snowball, anti-positive feedback loop stuff. The transfer units between heroes workaround then feels like this mastery-based technique, yet all you're doing is getting back to the state of game design you would have had without that stoppy-starty rule. And to do it, you have to inject in some anti-immersion, arbitrary feeling rule about troop movement points being tied to the hero's movement points. I'm complaining because you can do a similar, but I will claim better feeling kind of anti-snowball mechanic by just saying that units inherit movement points from the last hero they moved with, something like that, so basically the opposite of the current system. or just saying you can't even transfer units outside of settlements or something like that, but then also saying that it doesn't cost any movement points to start a battle. You would still be limiting the player by effectively saying you can only ever advance one movement range's worth of distance in a turn, but you also don't make it so doing things like fighting neutral parties, doing the side quest captures, breaking sieges, or killing weak enemies isn't effectively punished by also ending the turn, when in principle you could have done more. And with this movement tech you can do more, but it's just sort of annoying and weird and just gets you back to where you were before without having all these rules. So that's the actual bugbear I had that I'm desperately trying to justify changing here. There might be a real game designy kind of argument for doing that, and I think you'd end up with the same game, but it's just a bit simpler to communicate what's going on and makes a tiny bit more sense, something like that. It's not that I don't really like the switcheroo, it is fun to do because it feels like you're beating the system. It's only I prefer the system not to be at war with me. I don't want to beat it, I want to work with the system. Something a little more normal feeling, we're just planning ahead. And planning specifically where to recruit units so they are closer to where they need to be, so that matters more. Makes more sense to me than ferrying units about using this movement glitch feeling approach. And if you know strategy gamers, here's what they actually want you to do with your movement system. Here's the secret. Let them build roads. Yes, the Songs of Silence people will say that the ferry system lets you launch quickly out to your front line. It's necessary, it's fun. And the stoppy-starty battle system keeps the pace gentle, but we can just scrap all of that by saying, yeah, but what if we let you make roads? Roads in your interior massively increase movement, but you can't use enemy roads because the gods don't like you or whatever you want. There's your system. Now you can't advance quickly outside of your lands, advancing gets harder, but defending gets easier. That's what they wanted here, I presume, and it makes the player feel like they had some choice in the arrangement, and you get to make roads, the most underrated thing you can make in any map-based game. That whole hymn lines mechanic even probably has some of the code you need to do this already. Throw in, like, trains, and then it's all over for the gaming world, but we'll save that for the sequel, shall we? We collected up all the neutral locations and gained various ancient construct super units to supplement our increasingly well-stocked armies. Now, we're ready to go and defeat the Crusade, right? Well, maybe, but first we've got dirty Starborn to crush. Yes, the Crusade didn't actually follow us here, as it turns out. They're probably busy feeding all the people we left behind to the Great Ones. So maybe there was some purpose in sacrificing our whole civilization's population after all. It bought us time to go to war with Lorelei. Our simple plan is to hold the enemy in the west with our fortified and heavily garrisoned choke point, while Akkad brings the main force around to start stomping everything to death from the east. We can see some of the giant super units in action. Super units are particularly good because of how health and healing works. Generally, when you get per turn healing effects, they are a percentage of your health. So more max health means more healing, means more enemy hits are reverted per turn effectively. Plus, high health units tend not to die, so you don't have to re-recruit them. So the whole economy gets stronger. Positive feedback loop man is here to point out to you yet another positive feedback loop. How about that? It's all going very well, and we even defeat Lorelei herself in battle. Luckily, her army has been stripped down since our time controlling her, and speaking of this plot-placating, power-puncturing problem, here we go again. First, when you defeat Lorelei, a cutscene plays, insisting you were unable to get an advantage and were trapped in a stalemate. The classic you win, you lose cutscene technique. It says 2 months pass, then the Crusade finally do show up, prompting Lorelei and company to go back and garrison their stuff. And then I got mad at this, so let me just hit you with topic. The 5th mission in Songs of Silence is a scam. After seeing how the mission went so far, you might now think, ah yes, the giant constructs we spent the mission collecting explicitly to help us with this problem that is now occurring should allow us to turn the tables in some sort of gameplay event, or even just a story cutscene. But no. The cutscene insists that you lost everything off-screen, and that generally this whole mission was completely pointless. You even appear to lose more settlements during the cutscene, slicing you down so you barely have anything at all back to how it started. You thought you were rebuilding your kingdom? No, because it turns out you didn't. Why are you protesting? Why are you arguing that you did?
Don't tell me you remember doing it, because I've already said the golden phrase, "it turns out," and you can't argue with that. So why do this then? Because it's ultimately what the writers wrote. Like, they wrote you don't have an army in the end, and so hence you don't, even in the mission that was only about you making a massive army. They're trying to write in a reason for Lorelei to rescue you. Yes, it's time for everyone to take sides in this war. And really, there is this natural side called not feeding all life to the Great Ones that all the types of humans could be drawn towards. Hence, Lorelei is now fighting the Crusade at our side. And that's where they were going with that. And for that, they had to delete every unit, building, gameplay event, every speck of immersion. Just everything you did in that mission didn't count. It might as well have just been the cutscene that continued on from the beginning. Because they really wanted this specific scenario to happen at some point in the mission, but didn't make a mission that would have that scenario take place. So I'll just say they could have let you beat the Crusade with your constructs, and then had a you win, you lose cutscene. Or wrote in some reason why the constructs get their hymn sucked out and you can't use them, and then you lose the battle or something, and I guess that's similarly bad. This is a rather damaging example of a game kind of just wasting your time with a stage that actually can be skipped entirely. But it's not a damning situation. Like, in theory, you could change what the mission is and what the gameplay is to actually get you to a situation where you're forced to both fight Lorelei for a while and then ally with her to fight the Crusade because it's your only choice. You kind of have to make that happen through what the mission is. You can't have the mission be, you became invincible, and then the ending of the mission is, you died. Ambitiously, we could ask for several endings to the mission based on how well the army you built actually does in a few rounds of combat against the Crusade overpowering force. And if you actually win, then it will screw you over and say like, oh no, everyone died in a black hole while you were checking your phone, and we go on. Similar problem really, but it's got a little bit of gameplay. Just give me a bit of game, please, for old time's sake. Back on the gameplay side, I'm losing this battle, so it's time to whip out a handy feature, the retreat card. You can quit a battle midway after a certain amount of time passes, avoiding your hero dying and maybe saving a few units if you're lucky. Since we're in a scripted sequence here, essentially, I don't know how important it is to bother saving these units. Maybe something bad happens if Lorelei actually dies here, but the good news is that most of the disgusting Starborn died there in order to weaken the Crusade. So now, when the glorious Firstborn army sallies from the city for a second round of combat, we've got the upper hand. It's another victory for the power of sacrifice, I mean the power of friendship, yes. It's then agreed we will work together against the Crusade and stop attacking each other, both building up our kingdoms side by side, even if people complain about it. We need to redirect everyone's racism towards the Great Ones, a statement surely as true in real life as in this scenario. This leads right to the next mission, where we're back in a downgraded version of the Kingdom of New Erengard we previously built. Lorelei faces the task of not dying and wondering if a card will help her out at some point with this. Essentially, a really powerful army is gradually walking towards you, killing everything. So it's a race to put together your own really powerful army that will stop it. We can dash around our settlements, sucking up the garrison units and recruiting everything we can into Lorelei's army. Meanwhile, we've got settlements and an army out west to to power of friendship our way into having more time to prepare. This includes the cleric character from the earlier missions, whose name I forget because everyone seems to call him Old Man, which I thought was strange because the lines about him are read with this tone of endearment. But calling a religious leader Old Man feels very rude, very irreverent to the Reverend. Something lost in translation, I imagine, presuming this was written in German to begin with. I think it's a German game. It even throws in a little old-fashioned ludo-narrative dissonance. We will never get a game commentary on this channel where I don't get to mention the golden criticism, the evergreen criticism, and this time, it's the seminal case of ludo-narrative dissonance where they wanted this character to die. However, the rules of the game are such that heroes are immortal. You can always buy them back if they die, right? We can just use a Phoenix Down, right? No, this time, Old Man is gone for good, although actually you do see him again in a second, you could say. Anyway, after ominously walking towards us for a while, the Crusade met with Lorelei's army in a small settlement outside our capital.
using a settlement battle because it lets you bring in those extra line of troops in front of your army through the garrison system, so that you can power or friendship them against the enemy's first attacks to get off to a good start. This is a case where the hands-off approach doesn't feel so good, #that's what she said, because any semblance of formations and planning you do will just immediately be destroyed by how everything just runs all over the place in a mad frenzy and some things are jumping to and fro, and then you end up with battlefield situations where one enemy in the corner is firing away at you and you can't send one guy to stop them, and it's frustrating to think about how much easier it would be if you could. Eventually I used a cavalry charge card to force units into the position I wanted, so I should thank the Celestials I am playing as Lorelei and get the chance to do this at least. Although, because the outcome of this battle matters, and it's not terribly close, this is where the frustration of playing an almost auto-battler really comes in. We need certain things to happen, and I know what I want to do, only because we're basically controlling the army in a Mr. Bean sitting on the roof of his car with a rope tied to the steering wheel kinda way. It leaves something to be desired, that something being gameplay. I'm imagining a mod where all heroes get the charge card and its cooldown is really low, or some other hacky way of making the game's existing mechanics let you give pseudo-orders. Anyway, we did win this battle. Akkad and his treacherous firstborn show up after the battle, being all, "Oh, sorry I missed it," and giving no excuse at all, but he does reveal that we can stop the crusade by going back through the teleporter and destroying their base on the other side. So that's now the mission. At first I was going to push west and retake our territory, but I think I spotted in enemy turns that the crusade was coming out of the purgatory and moving east to attack on the other side now. So Lorelei will make the switch and start pushing over there, while the others try to advance. I thought maybe I can advance with an empty army, and you actually can. Sometimes towns are unguarded, and a single high mobility hero wandering around can get the job done. So that's pretty good, and yes, I managed to cross my territory in time to stop a massive attack over there in the east, breaking this siege, then we'll set out into enemy territory. I have a very vague point to make that's somewhat relevant to the advance that follows, bringing together some earlier points, so it's time for topic, healing, reviving, and consequences. Right now, I need Lorelei to take the army through battle after battle, without the ability to recruit units. This is possible since I can heal units. You can heal away for free 99% of your health bar, so only that last 1% of damage has a consequence, economically or even militarily. It's that old setup. One I've vaguely moaned about in Total War games because it creates this satisfying yet empty sense of momentum to your advance, a situation where a lot of what happens in the battles doesn't really matter. In Total War, I argued they sort of need to do this, because there are too many battles and they're too boring, so you need to be able to mechanically skip most of them, aka auto-resolve, and have that not have any consequences, aka free healing of damage from those auto-resolves. Now, Songs of Silence is also very much like that, and here we're facing these ever-respawning Crusader armies, where from a game design perspective, if you come out here and actually take losses against this freely spawning spam being thrown at you, such that you have to go back and recruit, that would feel awful. You're fighting the game's scripting, as I melted down about in that 7-hour rant about Terminator Dark Fate I posted. So we're in a pickle here, because letting you heal is required for both the momentum of the game and to avoid the AI's constant bouncing back from being frustrating and horrible. They wanted a game where you win lots of battles over and over. That's what's going to be fun, and in a strategy game, that means you can't have it be balanced. You have to have the player be overpowered. However, it's also supposed to be a balanced strategy game where all the factions are viable and you can play skirmishers. It's designed like a multiplayer strategy game, and that then becomes a problem when designing a single player, you are the main character type experience. And infinite free healing and infinite free respawning of both allies and enemies means the player wins and wins and wins and wins and wins, but you could have fewer bigger battles. The Total War conjecture applies here. You can strip back all of the mechanics that have to be there because there are lots of battles, and have fewer battles. because you gain something from both concentrating the tension of the war into single events, and from not switching the gameplay flow between two different things, between campaign and battle, quite so much or so often, I claim. These are things I've ruminated long and hard on with other games, and I'm just shaking them vaguely in the direction of Songs of Silence. I think I wouldn't really try to hammer these in. I simply suspect that disabling healing and disabling respawning and cutting out all the battles with small armies that just suicide against you, like aka have the enemy run away from you if you're strong, things like that. This will stew up a different strategy game feel that will be less gamey and less, oh, all my men just came back to life because that's the rules of the game, and indeed less ludonarratively dissonant, the golden goal, make the writers and the designers kiss. And you can't just have respawning and healing if you want consequences, both for gameplay and plot. In both senses we ask, if death is a problem in this world, then why isn't it? That's the problem we must solve. That's the issue, that having a game where the design requires that you be able to heal for various reasons creates. And my brainworms are wriggling towards an answer, but let's just let them go off on their own for now. So Lorelei found that switching worlds is easier than expected. How do you do it? You play a card, of course. You have to fight something in the void sometimes, but otherwise it's surprisingly doable. And it makes me think of some kind of Pacific Rim-esque thing where we might want to bring a magic nuke in here and see if we can attack the Void Realm to stop them showing up. But we don't have a card for that, so we'll just keep cavalry charging everything that moves for now. Meanwhile, the others are still fighting in the Light World, and I wanted to highlight another strategy card that is extremely powerful, Sabotage. Some heroes can play this card to remove the walls on a settlement. No questions asked about how it's done and why you can do it from so far away. This is ultra powerful, as it means you skip, sometimes several turns of siege, and you get the settlement on the current turn, a massive positive feedback loop booster that prevents who knows how much enemy activity from taking place by skipping those turns. This card gets my actually good TM stamp of approval. We retake the place the old man died defending, and Lorelei says a prayer for him, still managing to cunningly never say his name, so she doesn't have to admit she doesn't remember what it was. She's just like me, for real. If you are also cunning, you might ask, didn't Lorelei get sucked through a black hole to another dimension in a previous scene, so why is she in this scene? Ah, how did you get so good at monitoring continuity? We'll never get anything past you. The answer to your question is, go away. Yes, the plot will happen regardless of what you do, vaguely reinforcing this idea linked to the army deletion / progress resetting thing. They've got a story to tell, they've got amazing artists, and just as they were about to start work on their graphic novel, they accidentally were tricked into making a map game with positive feedback loops and limited control of what the player does, much to their chagrin. So yes, we are actually beating the Crusade in the Light World even without Lorelei. But that will be retconned away soon, so I'm just wasting my time really. In the Dark World, we see the problem the Sabotage card solves. Sometimes you have to wait several turns for a battle to let you advance, wasting your potential for that time. But I love wasting my potential. You're watching Offie's Game Grounds. We carry on our glorious advance with the card, and one thing I'll say about this guy is that his battles are a little more gamey, because he gets more cards that do things, or at least I happened to get more cards that do things. I'll touch on this again in a second. It feels a little more interactive, even though his synergies and buffs apply to weaker units that don't doomstack so well as our main army. The standout unit is the strange pot of gold walking around the battlefield stamping on people. Having that in your army heals you every turn, and really risking it in battle isn't a good idea as they die pretty fast. Not that I even knew how much health things have at the time, most likely. Yes, I'm more of a basic bitch TM. I like Lorelei with an all-cavalry army. The void creatures will just neatly line up in front of you every time, and then you just scream and run at them. While we slaughter the Crusade and try to ignore that the game will certainly claim this didn't happen in a moment, let's circle back to topic. Leveling up is slightly random, and that hints at more of the game's true intentions. Yes, I've talked about getting new cards when you level up, but it's drawing from a pool of possible cards allowed for each hero. Admittedly, the pool isn't very big, which dilutes the point I'm about to make, but as always I will make it anyway because it's OVD's Game Grounds. The point is this: if you have a level up system that provides random abilities to the player, this limits you to two possible avenues of game balancing. Number one, it doesn't matter what happens, i.e. a true roguelike where player success or failure are both allowed and neither especially matter or are the more relevant thing. Or number two, the game has to be easy enough that it doesn't matter what build you are randomly dealt. In Songs of Silence, it is in theory random whether you have access to particular buildings or battle abilities, and you can't get all of them for every character. I would anecdotally guess you can get 2/3 of them based on how often duplicates were appearing by the end. In theory, this means if you're designing the economic challenges, you can't rely on the player having the ability to do certain things, meaning you can't make the game require it of you, meaning you're probably going to inherently minimize either the difficulty or the consequences of failure. This is what I meant by the game's true intentions. They didn't want those choices to be very important. They're all there just for fun, TM, and the game carries on without validating your choice, which makes me say, wow, 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 wow. In other words, I wanted to pick my level up path myself, and I wanted my choice to mean something when I face some scenario where having a particular set of buildings or battle cards makes me uniquely able to do something. As vague as this goal is, that's a very difficult game design task to arrange, or to arrange in a way that it's likely to happen. But games with level up choices can do this, and it's good. And all I'm saying here is Songs of Silence doesn't go that way. If you click randomly on the level up screen, it's probably fine. On normal difficulty at least, and if it wasn't, it would be bullshit feeling, since your options are partially random anyway. My firm "no roguelike mechanics allowed in normal games TM" rule must be applied, because I channeled the intention of the universe provided to me by the Grand Council of all the Gods, and it told me that randomized perk-based level-up systems are a crutch, and like a true man of honor, when I see crutches, I rush in to kick them away and proclaim this improves the world. Let me see the whole tree and plan a deterministic build for each character, please. I got into some real trouble at the end of this mission because I made the mistake of placing Lorelei in a town near the enemy's main base. The Crusaders constantly spawned new armies that immediately set this town to siege. So we then fall foul of this rule where breaking a siege costs a turn. My whole turn is used clearing away what the enemy spawned the previous turn, then they spawn again and resume their siege during their turn. Oh dear. This went around a few times, during which time we have completely destroyed the Crusade in the Light World and expanded New Erengard ever further, having conquered everything. Eventually Akkad brings his army to support this uphill battle at the enemy base, and that breaks the stalemate. The final attack you have to make is a difficult battle, but we already learned the solution to this right back near the start of the game. Sacrifice your lesser army first to soften them up, then go in with the real army. Of course, and in a similar vein to my level up rant just now, it doesn't and can't matter which order you do this in, since we're ending the mission and the Persistence will now break away. To keep with my Death Ball theme, Lorelei will be the one who wins the battle, and from here it seems Erengard now encompasses a nice slice of both planets. Or does it? The plot storms in to spoil my fun. Akkad declares that New Erengard has fallen, or something. Nothing we can do. Or is there? Yes, the next mission requires that you have lost this mission plot-wise, but traditionally one has to complete a mission to get to the next one, and nothing is done to ease this contradiction of Ludo and narrative need. So we losers point and bark like seals at another Ludo narrative dissonance. Anyway, it's mentioned here that there is actually one secret method we can use to still fight the Crusade, even if they have plot armor, and it requires allying with a mysterious being known as a Light Eater. What's that about? It's something from that mission I skipped earlier, so here my bluff calling comes home to roost. I have no idea what happened or why from here on, and while this is caused by me skipping content,
The game did say that was okay, maybe it isn't though. We have to take a trip into the Silence, making first to pour all of Akkad's troops into Lorelei's army, as having them together is way more powerful. This map is essentially a load of corridors to traverse and battles to stomp, with a bit of a twist coming up. The goal is to find this Light Eater, who is some kind of immortal guy who eats life energy similar to the Void creatures, and lives in the de-life energied realms, aka the last place you'd expect to find him if he needs it to live, but he might have some magical powers we can use against the Crusade, and supposedly he once said he might be up for doing that, before laughing maniacally, surely not indicating any kind of Faustian bargain. Well, you know, the plot's got somewhere it wants to go. But I'm like, well, if the Crusade are really a problem, why don't we just kill them? They're just guys. Even the Void creatures are just weirder guys. They still die if you run your lance into them. Why did we stop doing that? Here's the tricky part. You enter an area filled with forests and you're asked to get around a different Light Eater without fighting them. In other words, you need to walk to the right, but I got curious and walked to the left, where you can teleport to the Dark World. Yet you're stuck on an island with nothing to do. After wondering what all that was about, I eventually realized you need to use the forests to hide one army, while the other exposes themselves to draw the Light Eater away, and then they can go hide in the other world to avoid death. That's what they've set up for you here. Here's footage of how you don't do that, since we're too close together and got discovered. Not even a battle here, you just straight up lose the game, and your punishment for failure is more amazing artwork appears. But we've got the idea now. The game lets you hide your armies if you ever spend less than half of your movement points and end your move in a forest. This lets you avoid being targeted, and any enemy that will happen to walk into you gets ambushed, giving them one less power in the coming battle or something like that, I forget. And I forget because I didn't use this very much. Because the big-brained strategy sense provided to me by the Grand Council of All the Gods tells me that the cost here of not being able to use the second half of your movement range for a turn is actually very steep. In a positive feedback loop game, not completing a move in a turn means you're now officially one turn behind where you could be. That means in 5 turns, you're 8 turns behind because of how that disadvantage compounds, or relative lack of advantage compounds. Oh, the positive feedback loop brainworms are here. Try not to think about it, it's the only way. But yes, I much preferred moving as far as possible every turn, and generally ignored the forests throughout the game. Here though, I finally get to grips with it, also using the fact that Lorelei can cash in some points with the gods to enhance her vision range and see enemy ambushes, revealing small parties in the forest that basically restrict what routes you can take here and force you to bait the Light Eater in a certain way, which we've now done. This only worked because the Light Eater basically has no movement range, a common conceit the game puts on its scripted enemies. Akkad is now permanently trapped on the other side of the kill plane that the Light Eater represents, but that's no problem. We can go on without him and stomp the rest of the dungeon ahead of us now, and the plot will simply insist later that we didn't sacrifice Akkad back there. All's well that ends well, even if there's no particular reason for it to end well, let's just say that it did. In the meantime, topic. The art is so good that it's bad. This is something I hinted at earlier I wanted to talk about. It's another stupid point, but it was something I was thinking about while playing. The problem I have in mind is by no means unique to this game and wouldn't ordinarily be worth mentioning, only the art is so good that it's hammered this very blunt point so much that I can't ignore it. That point is, the world depicted in the art is so much more interesting than the world depicted in the 3D graphics or the gameplay itself, that it's kind of disappointing. As I think I mentioned, this developer is basically a mobile game developer, and the gameplay here is very mobile gamey, both in design and presentation. But from the art, we know this is supposed to represent something epic and quite original too, as I ranted about earlier, and I found that I wanted more of that brilliant world from the art. And the game wasn't delivering, leaving me able to make that ever annoying point that maybe if it wasn't so good, it would be better, because I wouldn't have been pushed into feeling that something was missing. We're missing the city-sized void beasts, we're missing the highly detailed characters and outfits, we're missing the emotions and interactions depicted in these random unit portraits. We're missing any sense that the ghost beasts made of bodies and soul energy of our fallen comrades are any kind of unusual or threatening thing, because mechanically they aren't. If this was somehow an animated movie, it would be the best animated movie of all time. It would be Spirited Away's evil twin, showing the most beautiful apocalypse and all the virtues and vices of the human collective in worlds old and new. And these just aren't things the game does. So my massive, huge, devastating criticism is that by having this game attached to such high quality assets, there is an artistic dissonance. Yes, I was able to say dissonance, thus meaning my point is valid. What I need, apparently, is for this studio to get the largest budget the gaming world has ever seen and make a game about the events and world their artwork implies. A world of hope and horrors with none of the casual, low-poly, low-player input niceties of the mobile game scene. And just have that on my desk by Monday, please. We end up participating in a Light Eater civil war as we make our way through the map. There was even a brief real game section where you had a base and territory and had to capture a tiny bit of someone else's territory. During this, your army ends up being this real mix of units, where you have some of Akkad's old race units, like the Constructs. You have your regular medieval dudes, and you've got this big primordial god who joins your army if you do a little side quest. That's handy. And you also have Gestalts, I think that's what they're called, and that's what I wanted to talk about here. Before I do, actually, I'll just mention that the end of this mission sees you having to defeat that powerful Light Eater from before, but now it's possible because he was drawing power from 3 things, and you can take those out to do the thing. You know, you've probably played a video game before, get the 3 things to do a thing. That's just a template scenario idea. Should come packaged with your writing software, really. While I do those 3 things. Topic: why is the guy next to me an undead abomination? And why doesn't that matter? You might see my army contains the same sorts of pinkish ghost-looking units you might have also seen fighting against me here and there. These are denizens of the Silent Realm, and hence the citizenry, you might say, of the Light Eaters' civilization. They're people who've had their hymn taken away, but also in many cases they're undead creatures or mad science combi beasts or ring wraiths but pink. A real mixed bag that defies easy description, and that's great because defying easy description means you did something original. It's nice to get this unit variety here, but I wanted to say 2 things. One is that because the game is just like jamming plastic action figures together, making sound effects with your mouth and seeing who wins, it doesn't really matter what the models are. That means getting access to skeleton cavalry isn't really a feature, because what am I going to do with them that's different to regular cavalry? Trick question, you can't do anything with either kind of cavalry. I presume they have different stats, but we've covered how that's a distant consideration at this stage. I can't really do anything with the knowledge of those stats anyway, so I'll just take the most expensive units and watch them do their thing. And thing 2 to mention is that there is something a little lore unfriendly about all of this. It's all very good giving you fun zombie units to play with, but at the same time, it shows that these creatures aren't special. They're just another unit, just another grunt for the ranks that'll do your bidding, even if you're a dumb mortal. What I'm getting at is that maybe you shouldn't be able to use these Gestalt units, or you have to use them in a different way so they feel different, or so that the lore separation of this strange civilization of what John Freeman might call zombie ghosts is more pronounced. As it stands, I get the impression that the legions of soulless beasts would probably put on a white-collared shirt and go to work in the office 9 to 5 if you asked them to. And they do a pretty good job, at least until the last wisps of their hymn are burned out and they collapse like a dying star or something. And I wonder if our human troops have anything to say about the fact that the guy in the next tent over is king of the underworld, with a body made of 10,000 damned souls screaming all night. It would be pretty hard gameplay-wise to have the silence creatures be really different to how other units work. But I'll just ask for it anyway. One thing this did make me think of, in a very shameful fashion, is that maybe this game should have stuck to a good old-fashioned 3-faction strategy game formula. We've got the Catholic humans featuring luminants, aka angels, we've got the pagan humans featuring magic robots, and we've got the Doomer humans featuring the Great Ones. But then you've got the Light Eaters, who are like these fresh take on necromancers, who are sort of the ghosts of the first 2 factions, or something. I guess I'm imagining that if you wanted to break the 3-faction meta, this 4th faction should be really avant-garde, like one with no units, or mobile towns, or something really different, something asymmetrical. I've been playing that board game, Root, if anyone knows that, where all the factions have completely different rules about how they work, and something, make Songs of Silence like this other thing that's completely unrelated. There's another great point. The Light Eaters needed to be more different in some way. Also, I don't really know who they are, despite the characters all being pretty familiar with this civilization. I guess I shouldn't have skipped that mission. To summarize this mission, we do something, and these magical beings give us the ability to massively weaken the Crusade via some mechanism we'll see in a bit, and that will save our kingdoms, in exchange for a certain price that is sort of danced around a little that will be cashed in later. There's a bit of plot going on here. As you might have noted, I'm not really talking about the plot, because its gameplay relevance is limited, and I don't feel like snarking about video game plots right now in a rare twist. Here's the deal. In the Light World, we've lost our territory again, and Lorelei returns to once again rebuild New Erengard and hold back the Crusaders. However, the main Crusade army has among its ranks a certain pig of power. Yes, basically this Crusade leader, Arbiter Garin, is the most blessed of the Void creature's servants, and hence he's been gifted immense power. However, the way the game presents this blessing is with this buff pig, a creature in his reserves that massively reduces the power of your units if you fight him. So it's a plot contrivance that also requires this weird gameplay contrivance to make it happen. My obvious suggestion here comes from none other than the previous cutscene in which we saw a creature the size of a mountain emerging from a purgatory. Maybe that appears, and that's why you can't stop the Crusade. A nice final boss where if you fight it, it just covers all the squares and obliterates you instantly. That could be fun. Anyway, we just have to buy time, because the Pig of Power can be defeated via a particular method. Akkad and the Light Eater forces will attack the Crusade base in the Dark World that corresponds to the Purgatory, the black hole, that Garin is using to draw his power. I actually don't remember why defeating this Purgatory will remove his power, and I also don't remember why the Light Eaters have to be involved or why we had to make that deal. Was there actually some contrivance here, or am I just not remembering it correctly? The eternal question with Offie's Game Grounds, the most half-remembered gameplay commentary in the West. Your goal is to not lose on the first map and go and win the second map. But because the two economies are totally separate, that's less of a gameplay consideration than you might first imagine. We needed the ability to choose to send resources back and forth between the fronts to make it a bit more gamey, I think. As it stands, the way this works in practice is you play two separate missions at the same time, alternating turns, and they're completely disconnected. And while it's more epic than usual, it's also kind of annoying because your flow, your train of thought in one mission is constantly broken by switching to the other mission. It might be better to give you that first mission in the Light World, you play that continuously, and just see how many turns you last. Then it switches to the second mission and there's a time limit based on how you did in the first one. Or something like that. It's a matter of taste, but I imagine I'd prefer not to switch back and forth here. The Dark World strategy is easy enough, you just have to walk towards the thing you want to kill and kill everything on the way. You might be asking, what can you actually do in the Light World if the enemy are just running at you with an army that uses a pig blessed by the Great Ones to cheat victory in any engagement? At first I thought the idea was you would do the old one-unit exploit, that's leave one unit at each settlement, so that technically a battle is required to take it. Since battles eat movement points up, all you need is one random bird or a spearman with typhoid to stand guard. That will stop the Crusade from moving out from that settlement in the same turn and buy you some time. It doesn't really work like that for two reasons.
One is that Garen's crusade auto-wins battles, even outside of that pig nonsense, by basically just sending in a black hole to do the business. That works, I guess. So you essentially lose settlements in a scripted way, and you can't defend them. The other thing is that Garen only has like 4 movement points, meaning he travels so slowly that ending his turn early makes no difference, meaning there isn't really much you can do in terms of strategy against him. The saving grace is another rules of the game exploit feeling kind of move. You can add a building to your town with the fortified keyword, which then requires the place be sieged for some number of turns before the battle against a single magpie with a spear tied to it. You might say, why can't the black hole bypass the siege requirements? I don't know, black hole, you'll never get past my fence and this hole I've dug in the ground. Maybe the void creatures don't want to get mud on their black hole. There's something you can build that makes it wait patiently somehow. I've already thought about it too much and ruined everything. But yes, we have a strategy here at least. It's hit and miss because in principle, whether you have access to a building that can do this, like the stronghold, is random, since you get them via level ups. But if I remember right, and I probably don't, the Welsh Centaur hero always has a certain building that gives the fortified trait, maybe. All I'm saying is this mission isn't completely pointless, which some of you might have thought, given the game doesn't actually give you anything to do. And of course, while you can go around conquering the Crusade lands yet again on the edges if you want, as I did, that's going to be retconned away soon. Like, you know the score at this point. The real mission is that you have to stop the non-immortal Crusade armies from attacking you as well. They have more movement points, so you need to hold map control long enough to get resources to kill off the normal armies, presuming you will also lose if they reach Erengard, that is. We don't quite have to grasp at straws to justify the gameplay being relevant to the game then, but it did come a little too close for comfort, with all of this scripted stuff, all the scripted outcomes, plus the inevitable deletion of all progress looming ever in the future. Looming like a black hole, you might say. I put it to you that this is all symptomatic of some combination of the game's problems with persistence versus scripting, and the scripting itself needing a little more care. For example, maybe you can do something to make the Crusade change direction, or something, or blow up a bridge. Little things with a cost attached, which you can strive to do, so it feels like you helped. Feels like you interacted with the game world. I like to feel like I helped and I'm interacting with the world, I claim, while actually just complaining about video games on the internet, the least helpful and least interacting with the world thing available. Well, the real mission, of course, the real mission is taking place in the Dark World, and it's a more simple affair, where essentially you just have to go to the left. The Crusade have the main way heavily defended, but there is a really obvious one other way you can go side route that gives you easier battles and leads to the objective still. So it's really a matter of doing this in an efficient enough manner that you don't have to go back and get more, or waste time any other way. And of course, because the battles are playing themselves, there isn't really much that goes into making that happen, you just have to hope that it does, and it seemed that it did, so there you go. Well, Akkad and his friend, that consumes life energy of others, as any good friend should, get to work on all of that stuff. I wanted to mention something I was meaning to bring up ages ago. Topic: it's a strategy game with ranged unit meta. Yes, it's a strategy game with ranged unit meta, meaning that ranged units are generally better or more important than others, like in every strategy game ever, and it's for the same reason as usual. If a unit can always attack, its DPS will be higher than its stats suggest, or perhaps higher than the developers intend in their pure, on-paper balancing, and things will probably get wonky because of this. This is a point I want to water down here actually, because obviously you've seen me just going cav 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 a lot of the time, and that works too. But the reason it works reveals the issue: they can move into combat quickly. Melee units usually don't fight in most strategy games, as their stats aren't applied against their enemy. Their in-practice DPS is low, they roll fewer attacks due to moving around and not being at the front of the fight and such, so they're tricky to balance. That means your squad of 16 spearmen might go a few seconds of 0 attacks per cycle, then a few of 4, then maybe they get broken up and they trend towards 12 attacks or something, but a squad of 16 archers is just sitting there making 16 attacks per cycle.
adding up to an easy to underestimate number of attacks, which then slips past the developers because they think, well, the power on archers is 25% lower than spearmen, that balances out them being at range, but actually they roll for an attack 400% more times in the battle and get a massive value increase because of that. Because the UI of the game doesn't really show damage sources or what's targeting what and all the nonsense of DPS comparisons you might make in a MOBA or something like that, this business is hard to really pin down and iron out. And basically my conclusion here is that if you make a load of giant robot things that throw laser beams with their hands, remember we're stuck in an original setting so I can't describe these units in a way that makes sense, and that's a good thing, then you'll win. You're always landing hits. Many of those hits cause knockback and stun, which gives ranged units a defense against enemies trying to close with them as well. It all falls apart when something jumps into your archer line or whatever, but they can't do that if they're being pummeled by 50 attacks per second, while your stupid lancer or magical tree guy occasionally gets off one attack if they're even standing anywhere near a target or facing the right direction, or didn't walk into an enemy stun field, or whatever nonsense happens out there in the mess. Those guys plugging away from the back are actually doing all the work. You love to see it, except when the enemy do it to you, and that's the problem. Do I really care that ranged units are powerful? No, I mean that's how real life works too. It doesn't need to be balanced with melee combat if you don't want it to. The problem is that when an enemy unit is shooting at you, you can't do anything about it, and now this higher DPS than expected or more attack rolls than expected consideration becomes a parasite drilling through your mind, and by your mind I mean, yes, my mind. I know how to deal with this problem. You could get them to stop firing and receive a 50% debuff for entering melee if you could click on them somehow. Like, I need to be able to move something, even my own ranged units, into melee with their ranged units. That's fine to me. Move. Only move. Only move. What's this? The game is playing itself? My dream? And yes, now it has become my nightmare. Why is ranged DPS so high? To punish fools who believed they had any chance in life. Watch as your melee troops move with the slowness of one running in a dream, unable to comprehend the notion of engaging the ranged unit in melee. And scream. Scream for the gameplay lost to the void. And that's what I wanted to say about ranged units. Here we are in the enemy base. Let us begin killing their dudes. There's an army guarding the manual override lever to save the world, and in this battle, note not only that the throwing of many lasers is happening, but also the throwing of many cards. With a card, true to his name, I ended up with many cards to use in battle, as I mentioned earlier, to the point I'm practically playing this game, like I'm doing something most of the time. This has eventually developed into a pretty natural feeling rhythm of gameplay inputs here. It makes me think that if you always had more cards from the very beginning, we'd have more of a game, and that single observation is so painfully powerful, like so well able to make me think the game's potential was wasted over this tiny balancing decision that I unironically can't bear to think about it, if only because I'm ashamed for not making this observation earlier and just like hammering this the whole time, because I get this second-hand contact paranoia, because I want to make more video games myself one day, and the idea that I could miss something so massive and easy to fix in my own design fills me with self-doubt and appreciation. There just needed to be more cards. You don't need to overhaul the entire thing. It would work with just that smaller change. Songs of Silence, you get 2 of every card mod, would be a solid point or 3 higher out of 10. That's the official off-ED, boring, tiny change to save the universe comment that will probably eliminate my major misgiving, even though, as I said, I actually do like the hands-off / hands-on-your-head combat as previously ranted about. Well look, here's a more solid complaint. We're back in the light world. We've reversed the situation so far that we're actually undoing the Crusade's work. It is possible to recruit a pig of power that removes the effects of silence, which then allows you to build in the silenced land like normal. I guess one day the silence will go away, as him is something you can generate. It even mentions in this mission, I think, that Akkad is generating a load of him because he's in love with Lorelei, a recurring plot point of not very much relevance, but it will come up again in a minute. I just wanted to point out how well we're doing, so we can all be ready for the roller coaster of persistency to fly down that hill once again, because my grand achievements will be converted into wasted time by the game presently. Here's how they're going to do it this time. When Akkad reaches the manual override, the light world situation changes entirely so that all you have is your capital region. What happened to everything else? Well, you can see on the left here, they died in a tornado. It happens. Our heroes have lined up for battle with the Dark Lord, who now doesn't have that pig of power to save him for whatever reason. We pulled the lever, but he still has a good army, and we don't, because the army I built up in the mission is also gone. Each hero gets a thematic army, a canon army if you like, although a few of the bonus units like the primals you got from quests are still added, so there is some persistency rewarding you for bothering to play either part, only there could be a lot more of course. So basically your role is to choose which order to throw this buffet of armies into battle one by one. Although first you can of course do some switcheroos to try and get more stuff into battle by stacking a single army, and that'll be Lorelei. It's a very the game was the journey, not the destination moment. There is this clash between a positive feedback loop 4x kind of game, where each decision is made in anticipation of what it will do for you in the next turn and beyond, to this smash cut to all of that being retconned. There's no distinction between scraping a win and actually defeating the Crusade by playing well. You've had your fun, you've had your game, now here's something else, and this something else is the thing that actually decides whether you complete the quest or not. Wow, wow, wow. Persistency mechanics and their consequences have been a disaster for the human race. Both kinds of human race at that. While I ranted, we did manage to get the win in our first engagement, after a long brawl of constantly healing and having our ranged units manage to go unmolested, hence constantly whittling down the enemy as they tussled with our semi-mortal cavalry. And so have we won here? Have we defeated the Dark Lord? The answer is, I don't know. You see, the game was essentially building up to this final clash with Garin, who is the leader of the Crusade, brackets or something. The only problem is that after dispelling his magical protection and finally killing him, it doesn't really stop the whole, void gods invading the universe problem. Indeed, the game shows our heroes being like, yeah, it'll take them a long time to recover from that. And it's like, but surely not longer than it'll take us to recover from losing everything. And indeed, the astute among you will notice that the black hole from which the void beasts enter our reality can't be removed, and now it's just right outside the capital permanently. We killed the guy who had the magic that moved it around. That's probably going to be a problem. Yet the real point here, the real plot point, is that Akkad is going to be killed or something, in brackets once again. The game doesn't commit to saying he died here, but in order to uphold our deal with the Light Eaters, we have to give over a person with powerful him to serve them. And it's implied that Akkad will be working for them rather than dying, but that may itself have the hidden implication of being turned into a zombie ghost first. In the next scene, Lorelei will claim she believes she'll see him again, so perhaps the details of what the Light Eaters do to their new hires isn't so cut and dry. Now, I really thought the ending here would ignore the fact there's a black hole outside the capital, but nay. We actually go into a not very happy at all ending, where a brief celebration over not dying immediately is quickly replaced with the understanding that virtually everyone in our new kingdom did die, just like in the last one, and we don't have any particular way to stop this from just happening over and over. Apart from, of course, the power of friendship, and that's the happy ending angle the final scene does aim for. If we work together, we can fail slower. Such is the rallying cry of the lasting alliance between new Erengard, please ignore the black holes and tornadoes edition, and whatever discombobulated remains of the dark world old race Akkad commands. There are also, I shall briefly add, questions about what the celestial gods and or primordial gods have to say about all of this. Like, what do they want? What's their role? What are their goals? But like the game itself, we don't have nearly enough time to even begin going there, only gesturing vaguely at the fact there is probably something going on there and the characters might even know what it is, but we don't, and it shall have to not matter. I guess all the characters died shortly after the end of the game, realistically, but perhaps a sequel will come along one day and prove me wrong. I am generally speaking quite jaded about the plot, so I'm not taking it that seriously, as you might have guessed, and the reason for that is the persistency thing. It really does break the link between the player and the events of the game. The game is just doing what it wants. And while that's not unusual at all, it becomes a problem by also pretending, or at least leading me to infer, that my choices, achievements, failures might also matter. They might be canon, they might not have been filler content that you wasted energy performing or thinking about, but of course that wasn't the case. It's a game design conundrum that is vast and probably needs a total rethink of what the game even is to actually solve it. So if I was a producer on this team, I think I'd be very happy to just ignore all of these issues. As happy as I presume the real team was. It's a 4X game, it's a puzzle combat scripted challenge game. Let's just mash them together and make liberal use of the delete key to handle any contradictions arising from these styles of gameplay being essentially diametrically opposed. You're free to roam the prison grounds as long as you return to your cell at night. And also step into this time machine so that if you do happen to escape the prison during the day, that now officially didn't happen. Enjoy. Anyway, the credits roll, and Lorelei stands there looking depressed as a black hole looms over the sunless realm of near certain death. Ah, I love the smell of victory. We conquered the Crusade once, back before the great persist apocalypse. Now it's time for my patented topic that I could have mentioned at any time but forgot until now, but that doesn't mean it's not important segment. Topic. Oh my god, it really was Hitoshi Sakamoto. We're talking about the game's music here. I spent the whole game thinking to myself, these losers have totally ripped off the musical style of Hitoshi Sakamoto, a style that was fresh in my mind because I recently played Valkyria Chronicles. And indeed, not much time passes between each time I listen to Dalmasca Esther-sans from Final Fantasy XII, one of the best and most unnecessarily good video game background musics. It's another example of a game asset that's too good for the gameplay it's associated with, but that's a rant for a different, darker day when I start complaining about JRPGs. My only point today is that I went the whole game thinking it was interesting that someone was trying to steal this guy's style, only to find out in the credits sequence that it was actually the man himself. So yes, I mentioned they got some money for this game. I guess they thought, let's just shoot right to the top and get some ultra-veteran Japanese composer in. And yeah, he did the job. The game is packed with epic music. The only problem is the same one from Valkyria Chronicles. There isn't enough of it. The game is too long for its soundtrack. And because Sakamoto's style is really bombastic and brass-heavy, it's not that good for being repeated over and over, in my own anti-brass biased opinion. So there you have it. They weren't messing around. This mobile game on PC has state-of-the-art art and state-of-the-music music, for some reason. And as an ultra-fun, super loser fact to accompany this topic, when I started writing my Songs of Silence notes, I was listening to a YouTube mix of random PC-98 tracks, because I'm one of the cooler people in this universe, and I heard a little section that sounded suspicious. I switched over, and indeed it was some random soundtrack composed by Hitoshi Sakamoto. Is there any sound I've heard recently that wasn't composed by Hitoshi Sakamoto? We need to get to the bottom of this. Long story short, Songs of Silence has good music. Now, after the campaign, I was poking around back on the menu. Out here, not only are there scenarios, like extra campaign missions essentially, that I didn't look at all, so there you have it / don't have it, there's also a skirmish mode that I did look at. It's surprisingly substantial, a real masterclass in strategy game skirmish modes actually, because you can do certain achievements across the game to unlock more characters and things for the skirmish mode to enable different builds, which all looked very good. and quote-unquote looks very good is the other point I wanted to mention. The UI is so good, it's just so good, it's really beautiful, and it doesn't trade any functionality for that. There's real thought put into making things the right size, and having there be a flow of thought through the menus. It's boring, I know, but designing the quote-unquote gameplay of a UI is a thing unto itself, where you have to really think about what info is needed when and exactly where, and what order to do things in, and it's unglamorous because you don't really get anything if you succeed. It just feels seamless and normal if you have perfect UX, so that nobody actually experiences anything in particular, whereas failure generates bad feelings and frustrations and back and forth navigation and constantly asking what things mean or where that number came from. And yes, that's basically every game. It's a very common problem, possibly because it's so uninteresting to solve. But for what it's worth, I liked the main menu gameplay in Songs of Silence, whereby liked, I mean I didn't actively dislike it, and that's more remarkable than it first appears. Right, with all that said, let's bring things to a close. I stumbled into Songs of Silence by accident, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was a very slick and well-made strategy game experience. Not too long, not too difficult, and with production quality that unironically steps into the realm of being too good. I went in planning to get mad at the automation of the battle system. However, over the course of the game I found that I didn't mind it at all. Asterisk, see previous hours of ranting. The game manages to avoid the problem of something like Total War, a problem I usually call pace breaking, where you're in the middle of your gameplay flow and then you're asked, potentially by surprise, to do a battle which comes as this very long mental aside that brings you out of what you were doing, and potentially won't ultimately be important. This can wear you down and make you dread having to do another defense against one more endlessly rebuilt enemy army. Here in Songs of Silence, the battles are short, they don't require much thought, and they're more integrated with the campaign gameplay flow state, not only because the campaign gameplay is more temporally proximate, but because really in battles all you need to think about is keeping units for the campaign. While in principle there is a detailed game of stats and attributes going on down there, you don't play that. That's only there for the game's own amusement, and because the designers got bored and decided to have a deep battle system that you can't use. This means the overall game flow is improved by not really diverting the player's attention to something that isn't the campaign gameplay. Except when the writers have their dirty way with things and we're reminded that the campaign gameplay was only intended as being something to keep you occupied for a while in between quest battles and scenes. So yes, we come to what ended up being my main gripe. The 4X side of the game is a little bit of a lie, it's a little bit pointless, and as pleasant to play and behold as it was, it's missing something, or perhaps it's truer to say that something was taken away in order to make room for a Power of Friendship plot story game where the player canonically loses most of the time, and struggling to fit that into a game where you're supposed to win most of the time mechanically. We are left fiending for a true 4X Songs of Silence, where the story of the game is that you stopped the silence with your own kingdom building achievements. I want to try the Total War experience with this one-handed, mindless battle system, and the Heroes of Might and Magic happy-go-lucky swashbuckling campaign mechanics, all in this same beautiful packaging. I'm certain others would complain about a lack of plot if they actually did that, and I'm sure expectations of the game being a narrative experience are what bent it into the strange shape it ended up in. But for my own tastes, the mechanics of the game demand to be set free. Perhaps you could still pull some rubber banding bullshit, like the Crusaders get uprisings in your lands if you get too big. The usual horrible things that everyone hates and everyone also hates you not doing because positive feedback loop games consume balancing concerns like a ravenous creature of the void. There's a game in there somewhere that uses Songs of Silence as it is now to its fuller potential. I guess you could do something with the combat too, like take this in a totally different direction, Tactics of Silence, but let's stop dreaming here. That was Songs of Silence. I liked playing it, I liked looking at it, I liked hearing it. Now do it all again, but better next time. Speaking of next time, the next game I'll be ranting about will be Phantom Brigade, a quote-unquote turn-based tactics game with a twist, and another highly frustrating tendency of getting really close to being excellent, just leaving that little gap for me to freak out in and start ranting about how they blew it all by not slightly changing one thing. The usual kind of brainworms freak out, that's coming quote-unquote soon, and all that remains today is to say thanks for watching. Like, comment and subscribe for more of whatever this was, and if you want a decent strategy game experience, try Songs of Silence, or indeed Songs of Conquest, the game this video was supposed to be about. I played way more Songs of Conquest than Songs of Silence for what that's worth, might even bother to film it one day. Goodbye, fellow Starborn, may the gods hold off on deleting your life achievements as long as possible.